A D-Class prisoner enters the chamber. It is quiet, save for the subtle whipping sounds coming from a bizarre shape in the middle of the room. Upon closer inspection, it becomes clear that the floating object isn't one entity, but a mass of smaller objects, all floating and thrashing in the air. Their ammunition, of various calibers and sizes, spinning around in a spherical form. The D-Class becomes nervous, but is ordered to proceed by Foundation personnel. Slowly, inch by anxious inch, he advances closer towards the mass of bullets. His heart knocks harder against his chest with every step he takes. The thumping begins to deafen his ears. He could feel his throat tightening up as the blood rushes to his head and sweat starts to form on his brow. The sound of the thrashing gets louder, with legs trembling and fingertips numbing. The D-Class opens his mouth in an attempt to let in a gasp of air to calm his nerves. But before he could even take a full breath, and in the blink of an eye, countless bullets suddenly burst forth from the mass, spraying the D-Class relentlessly with ammunition and killing him instantly. The Foundation personnel watching this from safety note down the events as they ponder the question: why does this mass of living ammunition act so volatile? Why are some able to approach it safely while others are killed? What is the secret of SCP-577? Classified as Euclid, SCP-577 began as one of the most mysterious objects in Foundation custody. An animated mass of ammunition. Those who are able to get close enough to it observe that the plurality of bullets inside were 9mm, accompanied by a selection of 10mm and 45 caliber rounds. The bullets are normally calm, moving in predictable patterns and occasionally shifting the mass to reflect other shapes, including cats and dogs. But something else about the mass concerns the Foundation more and more. The mass is growing. It is dramatically larger than it was when it was first acquired by the Foundation, and it seems to be adding approximately 1,000 bullets per year. This raises the question, can it be contained permanently? Currently, it is held in a standard large containment unit, but its quarters have been reinforced with the Foundation's best steel blast shielding. Due to the danger to anyone who opens the door, the entire facility is handled with remote technology and can only be opened by approved personnel. But someone needs to check that everything is stable. The Foundation learned the hard way that entering the containment unit was a bad idea. Any Foundation staff, ranging from a high-level scientist to a standard security officer, is met with immediate hostility from SCP-577's massive bullets the second they approach the entity. The bullets shoot out from the mass with speed of a standard handgun, aiming directly at their target. This indicates that SCP-577 is intelligent, it is capable of seeing and reacting, and it hates Foundation personnel with a passion. Fortunately, the Foundation doesn't have to sacrifice its permanent staff. SCP-577 is not the first entity to react with hostility towards its captors. After all, few of the specimens are happy to be permanently contained in secure facilities. So it was determined that D-Class personnel would be sent into the facility twice a year to inspect it for any damage, making sure the entity was still secure, and test SCP-577's reaction to the presence of different people not from the Foundation's staff. And that's where things got interesting. Many of the D-Class personnel didn't trigger the entity at all, resulting in neutral behavior. However, those D-Class who were initially Foundation staff and demoted due to broken policy were met with the same hostility as current staff, indicating that SCP-577 was not going to be fooled easily. The same happened with some D-Class with a specific background, who was immediately sprayed with a violent hail of bullets causing injury or death. Upon investigation, every single one of those D-Class was revealed to previously be a member of law enforcement. However, some D-Class personnel were met with a very different reaction. These people were the most likely to see the other side of SCP-577 when it reduced its hostile stance and instead took on a friendly form. Appearing as a dog or cat, it would even approach the D-Class in a welcoming manner. This was most likely to happen when the D-Class was formerly homeless or had spent time in the prison system. But one incident brought SCP-577's true nature into a new light. D-28126 was the latest unfortunate conscript to be sent into SCP-577's chamber for an annual cleaning and inspection. His duties were simple, including to inspect the walls for damage, clean out any stray material left around by the bullets firing, as well as any corpses that were left behind. and make any needed repairs to the walls. He would be wearing protective gear, but that wasn't always enough to protect someone from the hail of bullets, and no one knew exactly how the volatile mass of bullets would react. But from the second the D-Class entered, it was clear that this would be a very different encounter. As soon as D-28126 entered, SCP-577 seemed to take on a friendly posture. It shapeshifted into the form of a large cat and would frequently approach the D-Class while he was cleaning. The D-Class was confused at first, but soon seemed to appreciate the company. He would occasionally stop cleaning to pet the cat made out of bullets, but as the work went on, he seemed to slow down. He appeared to be crying, and eventually he stopped working entirely and slumped against the wall. The Foundation attempted communication with him, but the D-Class didn't respond. Soon SCP-577 joined him against the wall, and the D-Class held him. His hand was guided into the mass of bullets, and it soon emerged holding a single bullet. The D-Class held the strange entity for a few more minutes, before the staff's insistence that he exit the chamber grew stronger. He eventually left, and the Foundation took him back into custody and examined the bullet he was holding. It was not a normal bullet. The bullet was moving, almost as if it was a beating heart as it throbbed up and down. Upon closer inspection, it was revealed to be covered with blood, but D-28126 had not been hit by the bullet. He was completely uninjured, but when he emerged from the chamber, his hand was covered in blood, exactly where he had inserted it into the mass of bullets. The bullet was sent to SCP facilities for testing. The blood was not a match for D-28126, but it was genetically similar, like a relative. The D-Class was brought back into the interrogation chamber and the bullet was returned to him. He was apparently linked to SCP-577 somehow, and identified himself by his name, Arturo Rojas. His interviewer, Dr. Vanderbilt, asked him to explain what happened, and Arturo explained that the mass of bullets didn't just turn into a cat. It turned into a cat he knew as a child, which had a uniquely shaped tail that he would recognize anywhere. The cat that was once helped by Arturo and his brother. Arturo was questioned why he quit working and began crying, and revealed that he heard the massive bullets say something, barely audible. SCP-577 had whispered, "I'm sorry." But what would a cat have to be sorry for? Arturo became angry when Dr. Vanderbilt questioned this, but Dr. Vanderbilt continued and conceded that Arturo recognized the cat somehow. He prodded Arturo to share the rest of his story, and Arturo eventually revealed the root of his bond to SCP-577. Arturo and his deaf brother Ricardo were homeless at a young age, after their mother threw them out. While they were living on the streets, they met a cat that they gave a little of their food to from time to time. The little cat became their constant companion. They named him Duck, after Arturo's brother's favorite sign language gesture. But tragedy was just around the corner. Duck and Ricardo were inseparable, with the little cat essentially becoming a therapy pet to the boy. But one day Ricardo encountered a police officer. The deaf boy couldn't understand the officer's orders, and the officer didn't know or didn't bother to use sign language. Ultimately, bullets were fired. Ricardo was killed. Another unarmed young man killed in a police shooting, and Duck was left alone. But the cat had one more job to do. He had led Arturo back to his brother. The area was swarming with police, and Arturo never got a chance to say goodbye. He lashed out at the only one he could, Duck. The cat tried to comfort his surviving person, but Arturo threw rocks at the cat and chased him away. He never saw the cat again and was left alone with his grief. He saw on the news days later that the officer was cleared in the shooting. His brother was blamed for threatening the officer, and the news implied that Ricardo was a gang member. Arturo was left without closure until SCP-577 entered the picture. Dr. Vanderbilt expressed his sympathies, but wasn't sure what any of this had to do with the entity. Arturo explained further why he started crying when he felt the pulsating bullet. He spent years sleeping next to Ricardo, and he recognized his brother's heartbeat. The bullet was his brother's heart, or at least contained his essence. And for the first time in 10 years, Arturo was able to make peace not just with the cat he had rejected out of grief, but with the brother he had lost far too long. The Foundation had answers, but they only led to more questions. Arturo had pulled a single bullet out of the massive SCP-577, and it was the one containing his brother's heart. Was this the bullet that killed Ricardo? Was every bullet in the mass one that killed a person? Was the mass growing with every new death? And if that was the case, did the mass contain the memory and pain of every life a bullet took? If so, that would explain the compassion the entity seems to hold for those who had been homeless or imprisoned, as well as its intense hostility for any sort of law enforcement figure. For now, SCP-577 remains stable and contained within its unit, needing only standard upkeep of its cell to avoid any breaches. But as it continues to grow, Foundation authorities worry that it may get strong enough to eventually breach containment. But this is a tricky case for the Foundation. The entity's growth is out of their control, and nothing they've done to date has stopped or slowed it in any way. It seems something on the outside is making it grow, and shows no sign of slowing down anytime soon.
The year was 1983, and 7-year-old Andrea Bradbury was wandering the streets of Nashville, Tennessee. One of her favorite activities was to head down to the local movie theater and fantasize about the movies she'd one day be old enough to see. This fateful weekend, Andrea's local theater was playing a brand new release, Jaws 3D. What she didn't know is that this simple, innocent activity would bring little Andrea into dangerous contact with SCP-178 and change her life forever. Jaws 3D isn't exactly a classic. It was one of the many forgettable sequels pumped out to cash in on the 3D craze of the early 1980s. People paid extra for the privilege of sitting in the dark with an uncomfortable pair of cardboard glasses, while cheesy effects leapt out of the screen towards them. Many of the moviegoers simply threw away the cheap disposable glasses as soon as they left the theater, leaving them scattered on the sidewalk outside. Seeing a pair of 3D glasses on the ground, right there for the taking, was the highlight of little Andrea's week. She may not have been old enough to see any of the movies, but she knew that a local shop sold books with images that popped out of the page with a simple pair of 3D glasses. Excited by the prospect of getting to experience 3D, Andrea grabbed a pair of glasses and ran straight for the bookstore. Later that night, she was in her bedroom, with a stereoscopic image of a Ferris wheel. Andrea adjusted the glasses, and the Ferris wheel really did pop right off the page. She marveled at the image coming out of the book and felt like she could almost touch it. But suddenly, a strange feeling came over her. She had the feeling that she wasn't alone. Still wearing the glasses, Andrea looked up from her book and saw it, standing in the corner of her room. Something huge. Something monstrous. Andrea's parents heard her scream and came rushing into her room. There was their little girl, dead. It looked like she'd been mauled to death by a wild animal, but there was no sign of her killer. The windows were shut tight, unable to be opened from the outside. It was like whatever horrible creature had done this had vanished into thin air. The coroner's report didn't give any other clues as to who could have done this, except that whoever or whatever had murdered her, it appeared to have 3 long and incredibly sharp claws. The terrible tragedy of Andrea's death rocked Nashville, but it never made the national papers. Why? Because the SCP Foundation was immediately on the case. Undercover agents in the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service flagged the strange death as anomalous, and SCP field personnel arrived to do their own investigation of the crime scene. There, they quickly discovered Andrea's 3D glasses, which would eventually be classified as SCP-178. An agent looked over the glasses. There didn't seem to be anything out of the ordinary about them, just your regular cardboard frames with blue and red tinted film over the eyes. Everything about them seemed normal, so he tried the glasses on for himself. He picked up the open book off the ground where Andrea had likely dropped it, and saw the Ferris wheel pop off the page. Nothing abnormal, until he turned his head slightly. He saw the head of some kind of thing, only an inch away from his own, looking over his shoulder at the book. Being a trained SCP agent, he maintained his composure and looked around the room. As he did, he saw that several other creatures were standing and watching. None of the rest of the recovery team seemed to notice the creatures, and when the agent removed SCP-178, they vanished. It appeared they had found whatever had caused Andrea Bradbury's death. The glasses were immediately taken to the nearest Foundation containment site for further testing. Seeing these mysterious entities through SCP-178 may have answered one question, but it raised many others. What are these creatures? Were they real or merely illusions created by SCP-178? If they are real, are they somehow summoned by SCP-178 or simply revealed by them? There was already one death that could be tied to the glasses with some certainty, but just how dangerous were they? The SCP Foundation was about to find out. Foundation scientists devised a series of experiments, with a test chamber separated from an adjoining observation chamber by a panel of reinforced bulletproof glass. A member of D-Class personnel was placed into the test chamber, along with SCP-178. He was instructed to put on the glasses and report back what he saw to the researchers. The D-Class followed the orders. However, when he did so, he quickly entered a state of extreme distress. He threw away the glasses and covered his eyes, screaming wildly. When ordered to compose himself and explain what he saw under threat of termination, the D-Class described a hideous creature standing close to his face, watching. When asked to elaborate, he described it as having too many eyes. After that, the D-Class refused to put the glasses back on again, despite direct orders and threats from Foundation staff. He was then removed from the test chamber and observed. Although he experienced 2 days of mild paranoia, after 30 total days of observation, the D-Class was found to have no lasting psychological effects. Disappointed by the meager results of the first test, the researchers had at least confirmed that they did have an anomalous object in their possession, and pressed on with experimentation. They used the same methodology again on another D-Class. She was placed into the chamber and instructed to put on SCP-178, then described the entity she saw in great detail. When she put on the glasses, she recoiled in horror at the monster she saw staring back at her. She said that the creature was tall and bipedal, with 2 additional upper appendages ending in large conical protrusions. She also described the creature's head as being smooth. When asked if the creature exhibited any kind of aggression or hostility, she said that it was completely still. It was just standing there. After a few minutes, though, the creature seemed to lose interest and began staring at the wall. The researchers were happy to learn more about the creature's physicality, but they still weren't confident that it wasn't just an illusion created by the glasses. They needed to engineer an interaction. For the next experiment, they decided to alter the particulars. A fractal blue and red image, in a similar style to the stereoscopic Ferris wheel from the book Andrea had purchased, was fixed to one wall. Against the opposite wall, they placed a bucket containing 10 standard tennis balls. This time, the D-Class, a convicted murderer and arsonist, was told he was helping to test a new 3D augmented reality project. The entities he would see, as far as he knew, were little more than digital projections. Though when he actually wore SCP-178 and saw them, he commented that whoever designed them must be crazy. The researchers instructed the D-Class to pick up a tennis ball and throw it at one of the entities. The second he did so, deep lacerations began appearing all over his body. The onslaught was brutal and quick, and the D-Class was dead soon after that. This confirmed to the researchers that the creatures did seem to have some level of tangible presence, and they could be extremely violent if provoked. Next, they wished to see if it was possible to have any kind of interaction with the creatures without it immediately descending into violence. To test this theory, the researchers brought a 19-year-old D-Class into the testing chamber under the same pretense of testing new 3D technology. Much like the others, she was still horrified by the appearance of the creatures, but was calmed down by the researchers. They asked her to speak to the creatures directly, without exhibiting any kind of aggression. She said, "Hello, weird thing, how are you today?" in a somewhat bored voice. And this was all it took to sign her death warrant. She was immediately slashed to death by invisible creatures. The results seemed clear. Any interaction whatsoever with the creatures while wearing SCP-178 was a death sentence, like a slightly more outgoing shy guy. But the researchers would soon find that this anomaly had even more surprises. For their next test, they brought in 2 subjects. One would wear SCP-178 and dictate to the other how they should interact with the creature they could not see. The results of this experiment were bloody, yet informative. Both subjects were slashed to death when the unseeing D-Class interacted with one of the creatures on her companion's instructions. It appeared that anyone with sufficient knowledge of the creatures who attempts to interact with them is doomed, even if they can't directly see one of them. It was an upsetting realization for the researchers. SCP-178 may be much more dangerous than they initially imagined. and what they learned in the next experiment was even worse. They adopted the same methodology as the last for the following experiment. 2 subjects, one seeing and the other interacting. However, this time, as soon as subject number 1 put on the glasses, they knew that something was terribly wrong. He began panicking, stating that the entire chamber was full of the creatures, all standing and watching. The researchers undertook these experiments knowing that they didn't often turn out well for the D class, so they didn't seem too worried about this new development. That is, until the subjects stated that they could see 3 more of the creatures, and they weren't in the test chamber. They were in the observation room. In fact, one of them was looking right over one of the 3 researchers' shoulders. Immediately, the researchers lost composure and began to panic. They were used to putting D class in danger. That was part of the job, but they weren't prepared for this. In just moments, the observation room became a bloodbath, as the 3 researchers who'd been designing and performing all of the experiments were torn to pieces by creatures they couldn't see. SCP-178 had gone from being one of the more innocent-looking anomalies to one of the most mysterious and deadly. The creatures seemed to be powerful, violent, and incredibly numerous. The fact that they can only be observed through 178's stereoscopic lenses and kill anyone who even attempts to interact with them makes them almost impossible to understand. It was always a tragedy when the Foundation lost good researchers, but the work must continue. And the experiments were soon restarted with increased safety measures. Of course, those didn't do much good, and after another disastrous experiment that resulted in the whole sector getting locked down, all research into SCP-178 was placed under increased scrutiny. They needed to find some way of observing the creatures without the risk of having to share space with them. The proposed solution was seeing if the SCP-178 glasses were compatible with camera technology for remote viewing. Much like all stereoscopic glasses, they found that looking through only one lens at a time was ineffective. The solution was relatively simple: a dual-lens camera in a roughly similar configuration to human eyes. This, however, didn't give them the comfort or the answers they hoped for. Researchers commented, upon finally seeing the creatures, that they were even more hideous than they'd ever imagined. As they observed a victim interacting with the creatures via their new camera, they found that as soon as the creatures were interacted with in any way, they would grow 3 long claws and attack. And they were as fast as they were ferocious. From the observations, there were only a few things that the Foundation now knew about them for sure: their physical appearance, their violent nature, their enhanced physical abilities, and the fact they appeared to be pretty much everywhere. And who knows how long they'd been here, observing us humans while we glided by them, ignorant to their presence. It's enough to make you think twice before putting on a pair of 3D glasses again. But of course, never putting on the glasses doesn't mean you're safe. Just knowing about them puts you in danger. They could be standing next to you right now, looking over your shoulder as you watch this video. Just remember, if you want to be safe, you can't ever let them know you're aware. After all, just because you can't see something doesn't mean it can't hurt you. The year is 1941, and the world is gripped by the most violent and widespread war in history. Millions march to war as bloody battles are fought across the globe. Horrendous atrocities are carried out on groups of people, and parts of London are bombed to rubble on a weekly basis. Considering it's only been 20 years since the last World War, it must seem to the early residents of the early 20th century that the world is coming apart at the seams. And amongst the chaos, it'd be easy not to notice a secluded manor house in the English countryside disappearing without a trace for 11 days, before suddenly returning to our reality. But thankfully, one organization makes it its sole duty to notice the unnoticeable and understand the impossible: the SCP Foundation. And within that anomalous manor house, Foundation agents and researchers were about to find horrors beyond even their darkest imaginations. This is the grim tale of SCP-1461, better known as the House of the Worm. When the manor house reappeared after its 11-day absence, the Foundation zeroed in, sending agents inside to investigate. It was a 2-level dwelling complete with 12 bedrooms, 4 baths, 3 studies, a main foyer/ballroom, a library, a kitchen, and a pantry basement.
The Foundation observed that a number of these rooms had been fitted with rows of bunk beds, similar to a boarding house or barracks. Only later would they understand why. They found that the upper portion of the home exhibited no abnormal qualities whatsoever. But as the agents investigated further, they found an entrance to the truly anomalous portion of the manor, the extensive sub-level system. No previous records of the building kept by the local council indicated that there would be anything below the manor's basement, so either the mysterious previous occupants, who were nowhere to be found, had built this sub-level or had just appeared here on its own. Regardless of which was the case, agents and researchers knew that whatever had happened down here had everything to do with the manor's mysterious disappearance. They descended into the depths of what seemed like a man-made cave system, constructed primarily from a mix of concrete, iron, and brass. It was a behemoth of 20th century technology, intricate snaking systems of pipes, gears, and pumping pistons. It was like someone had built an entire factory down here. But for what? The agents began to spread out through the labyrinthian bowels of the manor, hoping to find some answers. But all they seemed to discover was more questions. This place hadn't been built with any form of comprehensible logic. It was full of dead ends, stairways that ascended and descended to nowhere, doors that would open to reveal just walls behind them or not open at all. It was like a maze built by a maniac. It didn't help that it looked like the place was recently hit by an earthquake, with some passages caved in and mangled machinery strewn about. It seemed that no human workers had interfered with the impossibly complex and bizarre machinery in quite some time. A number of the materials used to construct said machinery, as well as the gray sandstone filling in the collapsed passageways, remain unidentified to this day. Already, the sublevel was proving to be a complex puzzle box with only an estimated 75% of its layout ultimately being mapped by Foundation researchers. However, they would soon realize that this place wasn't just confusing, it was deadly. The only method of self-maintenance detected by the exploring agents were pipes that would fire a thick black lubricant onto the surrounding machinery. One of the Foundation agents had the misfortune of getting covered in it while exploring a darkened passageway, and 80% of his body was melted as a result. It appeared that the viscous black goo was incredibly corrosive to all organic matter. A number of the machines also emitted dangerously high quantities of gamma and X-ray radiation, making it difficult to explore many of the caverns without heavy hazmat protection. And worst of all, were the extremely hostile creatures living in the caves who would regularly attack Foundation personnel. These abominations came to be known as SCP-1461-1, vicious steampunk Frankenstein monsters, once human, but with large parts of their bodies replaced by crude mechanical implants, including metal teeth and claws. 1461-1s have displayed a taste for human flesh, and they have dragged multiple Foundation agents down into their lair to be converted into monsters like them. It's believed that SCP-1461 is capable of controlling these beasts through the strategic use of sound from its brass-speaking pipes, leading them into areas where Foundation personnel are present to instigate conflict. Many of these pitiful creatures have had their throats replaced by phonographs, endlessly repeating the same nonsense phrases over and over again. I am what you have made me. I am choice, and I am tyranny. Forgive me. I am then, and I am now. What gods they will be then. I am evil, and I am flesh. I am the trap. I am beauty, and I am chaos. Children are selfish. I am the worm. I have broken God. Still, in spite of the mazes, monsters, and deadly chemicals, the agents persisted and managed to discover several important locations. The gel production chamber on sublevel 3 creates glass jars from the unidentified sandstone and fills them with a slime that looks to contain living eyes and teeth. The factory deliveries room is filled with a huge number of crates and boxes, which seem to shift and change in number between Foundation patrols. The speaking tube room on sublevel 11 contains a grand pulpit that acts as the connecting point for the complex array of speaking tubes running through the entire cave system. The body parts of a deceased female also appear to be wired into the machinery, like spare parts. And on sublevel 12, they found the so-called catalyst room. Here they discovered a huge, complicated, clockwork and steam-powered machine that appeared to be broken and missing some parts. Most horrifying of all, though, is the raised platform in the center of the catalyst room, on top of which is a metal hospital bed. A desiccated male corpse rests upon the bed, its chest punctured by large syringes connected by tubes to some kind of pumping machine. The parts connecting this pumping machine to the overall apparatus of the room were missing though, leaving its purpose a mystery. The Foundation assumed that fluids used to be drawn out of this corpse to somehow power the machine. You may be starting to worry that there doesn't seem to be any answers here, that this house is one big mystery. But lucky for you, you're wrong. An old journal was also discovered in the catalyst room, and if what was written inside is to be believed, then we may finally have some truth about who created the House of the Worm, why it was created, and what horrible events triggered its mysterious disappearance and reappearance. His true name has been redacted by the Foundation, and special efforts have been made to maintain secrecy around the house, seeing as it's an anomaly of great interest to a cult known as the Church of the Broken God. So we'll just call the one who made this place the inventor. Before any of this, the inventor was one of the many Englishmen traumatized and almost killed in the horrific trench battles of World War I. After a near-death experience, the inventor, like many geniuses and madmen, was plagued by surreal and nightmarish visions. He saw a huge creature that he referred to as the Worm, a gigantic metal monstrosity with dragon-like jaws full of gnashing gears that rampaged through Europe, destroying and devouring everything in its path. These apocalyptic visions also presented him with a solution, vague blueprints for a machine that might be the salvation of him and others willing to take his new gospel to heart. An escape from a world that the inventor knew in his heart was about to end. He hired work-starved laborers from across the country to help him make his visions a reality, and began a massive secret construction project beneath his isolated country manor house. For the inventor, it was all a labor of love. He wanted to protect his wife, son, and daughter from the terrible jaws of the worm. But as the project stretched on, his wife began to suspect that he'd lost his mind. Many of his workers, however, felt just the opposite. They became infatuated by the inventor's sermons on the nature of the worm and the coming apocalypse they hoped to escape. Soon enough, they had become a bona fide cult, constructing the elaborate sublevels underneath the house in preparation for the fast-approaching day of reckoning. Then came World War II. The inventor saw Hitler, hungry for war, as one of the avatars of the worm. Finally, knowing that the time was right, he activated the machine and successfully trapped the worm in the bowels of his mechanized home. However, as the Blitz raged and London's bombing began, the inventor felt as though he hadn't stopped anything. He realized once and for all that he was never meant to stop the apocalypse, only escape it. And by throwing the final switch and setting the machine he and his followers had built into overdrive, he did just that. This was the moment that the House of the Worm disappeared, transporting the inventor, his family, and his devoted staff to a different world. An empty gray world, devoid of war but also lacking all the comforts of regular life, including food. Things went downhill from there, as their supplies quickly began to run out, and the cult descended into cannibalism in order to survive. Things weren't going much better in the inventor's personal life. His wife, fearing what would happen to the family, took her own life and the life of his daughter. Though by this point, the inventor's mind was so fractured that it's possible he may have killed them himself. Either way, it was only the inventor and his son left, and more trouble was brewing. Eudora, one of the staff trapped in the building with the inventor and his cult, started a mutiny. She claimed the worm spoke to her from below, and that their only path to salvation was pleasing the worm. How would they please it? A sacrifice, of course. They would give it the son of the man who had trapped it. The mutineers took the inventor's only remaining child and descended into the lowest sublevels. The inventor followed, hoping to track them down, save his son, and salvage something from this nightmare. As he ventured deeper, battling the members of Eudora's new cult, he found that they were changing themselves, becoming the half-human cyborg creatures that the Foundation would later discover. The inventor would find Eudora herself in the speaking tube room. Her body, still living, was wired into the machinery, and she had sacrificed his son to the worm. In a rage, the inventor murdered Eudora, or whatever was left of her, then heard a familiar voice speaking out of a nearby speaking tube. It said, "I I am what you have made me. I am then, and I am now. I am choice, and I am tyranny. I am evil, and I am flesh. I am beauty, and I am chaos. I am the worm. The voice was his own. In that terrible moment, the inventor realized that the worm wasn't a giant, all-devouring monster. It was him. In trying to protect his loved one from a perceived apocalypse, he'd brought them all to their horrible demise. He'd trapped them with the monster he'd hoped for them all to escape from, because no matter what you build, you can't escape from who you are. Grief-stricken and broken, the inventor descended into the catalyst room. There was his son, stuck with the syringes, drained of all life to fuel the mighty machine his father had created. In his last moments, the inventor decided to do the only noble thing. He threw himself into the machine, destroying both it and himself in the process. The house was transported back to our own reality, but the worm, in a sense, was no more. But who knows if the worm is really dead? Its thoughts and poisonous intent still lingers in the caverns and rattles through the speaking pipes. Whatever really happened, the Foundation is still picking up the pieces today, and who knows what lurks in the parts still hidden from our knowledge. When you see some of the monsters and entities they try to contain, it's easy to think of the SCP Foundation as the good guys. And granted, when you observe the magnitude of threats like the Scarlet King, it's hard for anyone to not look like a downright moral paragon in comparison. But the Foundation aren't always knights in shining armor. Sometimes they themselves have committed horrific atrocities in order to keep their supernatural subjects under wraps and keep the rest of us safe from anomalous terror. Nowhere is that more clear than a deadly incident that occurred in 2010. The Foundation had been aware of the slow-burn sloth for decades, and many believe that the entity has existed for as long as human beings have consumed visual media. Movies, TV, web pages, and even print media, like books and magazines, are vulnerable. Technically speaking, the name SCP-2774 refers to whatever visual medium is currently holding the true entity, known as SCP-2774-A. Thankfully, SCP-2774-A has never made it onto the internet, where it could do truly catastrophic damage, but the Foundation has prepared for that possibility. They've invented a software program, Webcrawler A03G32, designed to constantly monitor all forms of online visual media for an appearance of SCP-2774-A. So, what is SCP-2774-A? What could possibly be so scary that even a picture of it leaking onto the internet could potentially lead to the collapse of human civilization? Simply put, SCP-2774-A is this image of an unknown humanoid entity in a bizarre sloth costume. While this picture may seem harmless, that's only because it's black and white, and any red or green hues have been neutralized from the image. Anyone who isn't red-green colorblind and somehow accidentally sees the true version of SCP-2774-A has a fate far worse than death in store for them. This is the same fate that would befall almost the entire population of the northern Canadian town of Harper Ridge in 2010. The residents of this small township were waking up and going about their morning. Some were getting ready for work, others enjoying a leisurely breakfast in front of the television set. All of those affected had unknowingly made the deadly mistake of watching the local news that morning. While the anchor droned on about some local economic statistics and delivered a dry advertisement for an upcoming town festival, the familiar image of something in a sloth costume appeared briefly on the set behind him. Most of the Harper Ridge residents who viewed the broadcast didn't even notice the sloth, but in that fateful instant, almost every single one of them was doomed. The slow-burn sloth doesn't always affect everyone who sees it. Foundation scientists have found that it generally only affects 40% of people exposed to it, and doesn't affect those suffering from colorblindness at all. However, one of the more frightening details about the sloth, which is classified as a mimetic image SCP for its ability to spread and appear randomly almost anywhere, is that it grows more powerful and more contagious with every living victim it affects. After claiming a significant number of new victims, say from a small Canadian town, SCP-2774-A's infection rate can rise to as high as 60% or beyond. The residents of Harper Ridge made their own predator deadlier without even knowing it. At a nearby Foundation facility, units were already mobilizing. It was too late for those who had already seen the slow-burn Sloth, but others could potentially be saved if the situation was contained quickly. In addition to the web crawler constantly monitoring the internet, the SCP Foundation also had a huge number of dedicated teams scanning broadcasts worldwide for potential instances of SCP-2774-A exposure. When one of these teams detected the Sloth's presence in Harper's Ridge's morning newscast and found that upwards of 4,000 civilians had already been exposed, they knew there was no time to waste. Back in Harper Ridge, the situation was already deteriorating. A few hours had passed since the broadcast, and those who were exposed were beginning to experience strange symptoms already. First, it was a sense of tiredness and lethargy. Then, an unusual heaviness to their body, as though they were experiencing sudden, extreme muscle fatigue. People exposed to SCP-2774-A also experienced clouded cognition. Even thinking straight became a real struggle. It was at this point that the true effects of witnessing the slow-burn Sloth began to take hold, around 6 hours after initial exposure. Little by little, the infected lost all cognitive functions and higher-level decision-making abilities. Their bodies still acted out basic movements very slowly, seemingly just as a result of muscle memory, but they had no control over what was going on. They became, essentially, living zombies, trapped in their own bodies and only dimly aware of it. This horrifying experience was completely consistent with prior Foundation research into the effects of viewing SCP-2774-A. And in a twist almost crueler than permanent zombification, victims of the slow-burn Sloth are randomly allocated around 150 seconds of lucidity every 24 hours, before being forced back into their zombified state. Just as 4,000 of Harper Ridge's residents were beginning to experience these effects, all local communication channels to the town were cut off by the Foundation. Well-equipped teams of Mobile Task Force operators began arriving on the scene shortly after, accompanied by a number of containment units in the form of buses and trucks. Lucky for them, the zombified victims of the slow-burn Sloth were incredibly docile and compliant by nature. Shepherding all 4,000 of them into the containment units were almost like working with cattle. Some non-infected local residents attempted to protest the sudden abduction of their zombified loved ones. These residents were subdued and either had their memories wiped with Foundation amnestics or were terminated on sight. Like with almost any conceivable situation, the SCP Foundation already had measures in place for a mass exposure event like this. All in all, a mere 4,000 was still on the low end of the potential infection scale. The 4,000 victims were secretly taken to Site-116, a Foundation testing site under the direction of Dr. Martin and his second-in-command, Dr. Clara Chung. There, they'd already been pursuing research on approximately 2,400 infected subjects from prior incidents, including Foundation personnel who were accidentally infected during the monitoring process. Thus far, it seemed that the condition caused by witnessing the slow-burn Sloth was incurable, and with 6,400 known living victims situated at Site-116, SCP-2774-A was at an unprecedented level of power. All site personnel were instructed to proceed with caution and carefully observe the behavior of their new test subjects. Dr. Chung spearheaded the majority of the hands-on research into the infected residents of Harper Ridge and observed some interesting phenomenon in the victims' behavioral patterns as the condition escalated. The infected subjects, even in their largely zombified state, developed an almost fanatically religious obsession with the image of the slow-burn Sloth. When left to their own devices, they would create idols of SCP-2774-A. These included amateur sculptures made of hoarded garbage, images drawn of the Sloth with any materials they could get their hands on, or even writing obsessively about the Sloth. Dr. Chung speculated that this behavior was perhaps an act of appeasement on the victim's part, hoping to somehow sate the slow-burn Sloth and lessen its effects on them through worship. However, she would later find out that the truth of the matter was far more disturbing. Initially due to their largely docile states, the subjects imprisoned in Site-116 were given a relatively long leash. The subjects were even allocated 2 hours a day for social interaction with fellow subjects at mealtimes and during a designated recreational period. During these times, the subjects would often trade their slow-burn sloth effigies with one another. However, Dr. Chung revoked the social interaction periods and began confining the subjects to separate Euclid-class containment cells when violence began to break out between them. It became clear that during their 150-second periods of lucidity every 24 hours, the subjects would become extremely distressed, agitated, and even aggressive. Dr. Chung also ordered any idols, from trash sculptures to doodles and notes on fragmented scraps of paper, to be destroyed immediately. At its new increased power, the Foundation became concerned that SCP-2774-A may develop the power to manifest through these images. No meaningful headway was being made on a cure for the condition, so something needed to be done before the situation got out of hand. In hopes of gaining a better understanding of the internal processes of slow-burn sloth victims, Dr. Chung decided to conduct a series of interviews with the subjects under her care. 2 such subjects, Subject 0866 aka David and Subject 7444 aka Claire, were isolated for a 24-hour period in hopes of catching them during their daily 150 seconds of lucidity. Dr. Chung and the Foundation found the results of these 2 interviews to be as illuminating as they were utterly terrifying. When David regained lucidity, he was in a state of extreme agitation and showed an unsettling fixation on the clock in the Site-116 interview room. Under direct questioning from Dr. Chung, he revealed that slow-burn sloth victims are fully aware of what's happening during their zombified periods. He compared the sensation to being a passenger, trapped and bound in a vehicle over which they have no control. However, in this state, victims are also unable to hold a thought consistently for longer than 5 seconds. This leaves them in an almost constant state of disorientation. Worse still, David describes that victims are subjected to near-constant hallucinations of the original sloth image, guiding and controlling their movements, almost like a puppeteer. Thanks to the clock, David was aware of when his 150 seconds of lucidity were about to come to an end. After apologizing for what he was about to do, David lunged at Dr. Chung, causing a guard present in the interview room to shoot him dead for Dr. Chung's protection. Dr. Chung's interview with Claire echoed the same sentiment. During her 150 seconds of lucidity, Claire first begged to be killed, before divulging further details about the zombification state. She would describe hallucinations of the slow-burn sloth stalking her constantly and controlling her movements. In some cases, the sloth would force her to open her eyes all night, while it stands next to her bed and screams at her. As Claire's 150 seconds of lucidity ended and she became non-responsive, Dr. Chung put in a request for Claire's termination, a request that was fulfilled 3 days later. The third interview with Subject 9225, also known as Jason, showed that SCP-2774-A appeared to be manually starting the fights between the subjects, perhaps even for its own sadistic amusement. He also stated before the interview's conclusion that the image of the sloth in his hallucinations was becoming darker and more tangible, almost like it was becoming a real physical being, which was an unprecedented phenomenon. Dr. Chung was, for the first time in a while, truly afraid. It seemed by all accounts that SCP-2774-A's power was growing considerably as a result of its huge number of active victims. Its infection rate had likely risen well above 40%, and its ability to manifest would likely be on the rise too. If the slow-burn sloth was able to manifest on a national broadcast, millions would be infected, to truly apocalyptic results. Dr. Chung only saw one solution that might curtail the entity's growing power, but it wouldn't be pretty. She devised a procedure known as Procedure XXJ9. As part of the procedure, additional staff were brought into Site-116 immediately. The real purpose of the plan was revealed shortly afterward: to reduce the number of active subjects on site from 6,400 to a mere 200 in hopes of reducing risk. Over the next several days, staff at Site-116 engaged in the gruesome task of executing around 6,200 infected subjects via lethal injection. This was an atrocity so horrific, even by SCP Foundation standards, that Dr. Chung allowed the parties involved to use Class A amnestics to erase their memories of being involved in the mass murder of Site-116's subjects. In the aftermath of the call, the Foundation did report a decrease in SCP-2774-A's manifestations, so Dr. Chung's procedure did indeed work, just at a heavy human toll. The tragic incident of the 2010 Harper Ridge SCP-2774 containment breach is a grim reminder of just how far the SCP Foundation is willing to go to do their job, and a reminder to be careful where you look, because some images have a much more lasting impact than others. The helicopter hovered over the back streets of Manhattan. To the untrained eye, it would look like any commercial or news helicopter, the kind of thing that might catch your attention for a moment and then leave just as quickly as your mind wanders over to wondering what you'll have for dinner. Nobody would know from a mere glance that Mobile Task Force Iota-5 were inside, a four-man team on a dangerous mission. This has always been the greatest power of the SCP Foundation, hiding in plain sight, using the mundane as a cloak to go unnoticed. But this time, the monster they were hunting was capable of doing the exact same thing. And for the personnel of the Foundation, this ability is an affectation, a learned and adopted skill. For SCP-247, this ability, that it employs to deadly effect, comes as naturally as breathing air. The helicopter was monitoring local police scanners and phone activity, as well as receiving direct radio orders from command back at a classified containment site. The latest intel was incoherent, horrified screaming over the phone traced back to a nearby alleyway. Someone had seen something horrifying. This was Iota-5's cue to intervene. They rappelled down from the helicopter onto the roof of a nearby tenement building, clad in thick tactical armor, anti-memetic scramble goggles, Dan Inject IM injection rifles loaded with 10cc S10 syringe darts, each one carrying an immobilizing payload of potent fast-acting xylazine, and high-powered conventional weaponry in case of emergencies. If anyone in the world was capable of tracking, securing, and containing SCP-247, it was these four operatives. And yet, by the end of today's mission, one of them would be dead. But they didn't know that yet. Like all good MTF members, they had tunnel vision for the mission at hand. They used a fire escape ladder on the side of the building to reach the bottom of the alleyway quickly. There they came upon a gruesome sight, the aftermath of an attack. On the ground, a dead body with what looked like claw marks all over it. Iota-5 found another civilian, half mad with confusion and terror, hiding behind a nearby dumpster. She just kept shaking and repeating, "But she was so little," over and over again. One member of the task force, Corporal Rico, elected to stay behind and secure the area, while Foundation cleanup teams zeroed in to sweep the scene and provide amnestics to witnesses. The remaining three continued the high-stakes chase on foot. Their eyes in the sky radioed in. "Stay frosty, Iota. We've got unusual incident reports from an apartment building a quarter click north of your position. Potential fatalities. 247 is in an extremely hostile state. Engage with caution. Over." The trio engaged quickly, running towards the source of the disturbance at breakneck speeds. They knew they were getting closer when they heard the shrieking and the deep, guttural growls, that low primal rumbling of a true apex predator. Already, this containment breach was turning out to be a horrific mess. It was going to be a nightmare for the higher-ups at the cleanup and misinformation departments to handle, paying to repair inexplicable property damage, providing amnestics to tens if not hundreds of traumatized witnesses, creating plausible cover stories for upwards of at least 10 dead New Yorkers. But even all that mess would have to wait until the creature was actually captured and contained once more, which would be an ordeal unto itself. They found SCP-247's access point into the building, a wooden door torn to splinters by huge claws and fangs. Iota-5 charged inside, injection rifles at the ready, only to find carnage in the hallway. 3 more bodies, with deep claw marks cutting into their flesh. It was a harrowing sight, but the team didn't have time to waste processing it. They needed to stop 247 before it killed again and again and again. The team followed the trail of blood and the claw marks carved into the ground where 247 had passed. After killing the 3 people in the hallway, it destroyed another door and gained access to a nearby stairwell. The blood continued up the steps. Iota 5 pursued. The next splintered door, clawed and bashed off its hinges, led them further. They could hear the growling again, distant but clearly audible. They were close. There were another 2 attacked corpses in the hallway. Previous corpses had been partially or even entirely eaten. These 2 had just been clawed to death. Defensive kills. They'd backed the beast into a corner, and now it was panicking, slaughtering anything it perceived as an interference. They pressed on now. This was the endgame. Soon they found the final busted door. This one led into one of the building's private apartments. There'd be no other way out from here. 247 was trapped. The 3 members of Iota 5 shouldered their injection rifles and crept inside, full stealth mode. Something about the apartment was haunting. It portrayed all the signs of belonging to a young single mother and her only son. This was confirmed when they found the dead body of the mother in the living room, eyes glassy and throat clawed out with one feral strike. They could hear something else in the apartment too, a soft, gentle cooing, too human to be anything else. They followed the noise until they reached the child's bedroom. What they saw there caused even the most hardened member of the trio to break out in a cold sweat. This was the one thing they didn't want to happen. The child, utterly oblivious to the atrocities that had unfolded in his building, to even the death of his own mother, was sitting in his bedroom petting a kitten. It was the sweetest little cat you've ever seen. A fluffy, harmless creature with an orange striped coat. This is the dreaded SCP-247. The child just kept repeating, "Good kitty, while petting her. SCP-247 purred and rolled around playfully. To the untrained eye, it would seem that a kitty like this couldn't hurt a fly, but that's where you couldn't be more wrong. Iota 5 stared at this display in a state of nerve-shredding terror, thinking fast, trying to calculate their next move. "Aw, what an adorable little cat," one of the Iota 5 members found themselves blurting out. It was clear that 247's effects were starting to have an impact on even these hardened soldiers, and they needed to act quickly. They could fire a tranquilizer dart right here or right now, but in the ensuing panic, SCP-247 would almost definitely lash out and maul the child. It wasn't a risk that they could take, but time was already running out. 247 would only allow the child to play for so long before something terrible happened. It was an inevitable part of SCP-247's process. That's when Private Kowalski, one of the remaining members of Iota 5, stepped forward. He was about to do the only thing he could do, knowing that it would cost him his life. As he took his final action, the Foundation credo looped once more through his head. "We die in the dark, so that others can live in the light." Fighting against the urge to rush forward and start petting the cat, he instead lunged forward and struck the cat with his foot. Immediately it turned and pounced, knocking Kowalski against the wall with terrifying force. It gave the most ferocious growls as it tore into the screaming Kowalski, eviscerating his abdomen. The child screamed and retreated into the opposite corner of the room. Kowalski was done for, but now his teammates had a clear shot. They secured 247 in their sights and unloaded several darts into its flank, sedating it with their powerful tranquilizers. Soon after, it gave a lethargic growl and collapsed onto the ground. An evac and containment team were already on the way, along with the cleaners. Many had died that day, but at least SCP-247 would be brought back into containment, preventing further bloodshed. Kowalski would be given a posthumous Medal of Bravery for his selfless actions in the line of duty, as well as a generous stipend to his grieving family. By this point, you're probably wondering, how can a harmless kitten cause so much carnage, mayhem, and despair? The answer is simple. It's not a kitten at all. It's a fully grown female Bengal tiger, 9 feet and 400 pounds of pure muscle, with 4-inch claws, 4-inch canines, and an inbuilt killer instinct. But due to an anomalous mimetic effect, 247 can only ever be perceived as a sweet, tiny house cat. But even worse, due to its additional cognitohazardous properties, almost everyone who sees 247 is compelled to approach, and begin dotting and fawning over it. And that's exactly how it gets its prey. Its mimetic properties are actually so flawless that, regardless of Foundation countermeasures, it has never been perceived as anything other than a kitten. It's actually only through forensic analysis into things like bite and claw marks left on victims, measurements of weight, and abnormal water displacement in aqueous environments that we can tell it's really a tiger at all. For a brief period, SCP-148, a metal that seems to counteract cognitohazards and mind-warping anomalies, was used in the containment of this Euclid-class creature, but these measures were abandoned after SCP-148 proved to have a negative impact on nearby Foundation staff after prolonged exposure. Now strict protocols of surveillance and distancing are required to prevent hapless Foundation staff members from being lured into their doom by 247. The head researcher on the SCP-247 case wanted to conduct a series of experiments on SCP-247, hoping to find out more about the interplay of its unique traits with other members of the animal kingdom. 2 control animals were brought in to represent the duality of SCP-247. Control A was a yellow kitten, roughly matching 247's apparent shape and size. Control B was a fully grown Bengal tiger, representing 247's actual shape and size. A mixed breed cat-chasing terrier was brought in for the first test. It immediately followed Control A around, barking wildly until it retreated up a tree. Unsurprisingly, it fled in terror from Control B, cowering in the corner. Control B paid no mind to the dog, perhaps considering it beneath its attention, even as prey. With SCP-247, the dog initially ran towards it, barking until it was only 5 meters away. At this point, 247 let out an irritated mewling noise, and the dog fled to the corner in terror, suddenly aware of its true nature. For test number 2, a male tabby kitten was brought in. As expected, it simply played with Control A and was terrified of Control B. In the first part of the test with 247, the anomalous attributes of the creature led to some surreal, mind-bending footage. At multiple points, 247 picked up the other kitten, as an adult female tiger might do with a cub, and lifted it higher than 247 seemed to be capable of. It was like watching a glitch in real time. In the second part of the test, the kitten immediately fled in terror, suggesting 247 can control how it's perceived. Next came a deer, prey typical of a Bengal tiger. Neither Control B nor 247 were fed for 3 days prior to this experiment, and both killed and ate the deer. However, curiously, 247 killed the deer with a single merciful bite to the neck before eating, compared to its more brutal methods with human targets. And when this experiment was repeated with 247 after it hadn't been starved, it showed little interest in the deer until it became hungry again, suggesting it inherently prefers human or human-like prey. This theory was further reinforced during tests with a chimpanzee. The chimp fell under 247's cognitohazardous spell and began to pet it. 7 minutes later, 247 attacked and brutally devoured the chimp as it would its human prey. But strangely, the most frightening result of all came when SCP-247 was paired with an adult male Bengal tiger. They engaged in standard mating behavior, which later led to the duo reproducing a new creature, designated SCP-247-1, which had all the anomalous traits of SCP-247, but the frightening realizations don't stop there. Studies into genetic material provided by SCP-247 show slight deviation from a typical Bengal tiger's genotype, suggesting contamination from another creature that mated with one of its non-anomalous tiger parents. For context, tiger broods have an average of 3 cubs, but can have as many as 7, a common practice given how tiger cubs are vulnerable to cannibalism from rival adult males looking to court the females. This leads to only one frightening conclusion. There could be more creatures just like SCP-247 out there, apex predators that seem to the untrained eye like cute, harmless kittens. They could be anywhere. And if they're close enough to each other or other non-anomalous tigers, they could breed even further, becoming the scariest invasive urban species you've ever seen. Because after all, we know what their preferred prey is now. So the next time you see a cute little orange tabby cat and feel the instinct to pet it, Take a second to think about it. It may be the last thing you ever do. When it comes to bugs, the SCP Foundation certainly has its hands full. You might remember SCP-726, a species of bowfly aptly named the reconstructive maggots, who recreated the bodies of other organisms through horrible reproduction methods. There's also SCP-2031, a colony of anomalous ants that would eat their victims' insides and burrow themselves in the bodies, puppeting them around and masquerading as the creature they just ate, even if it was a person. Today on SCP Explained, we're going to be talking about a new species of anomalous insect, SCP-378, nicknamed the Brainworm. Well, it's an anomaly only new to us. For the Foundation, SCP-378's discovery and containment dates back to the days of the American Secure Containment Initiative. The American Secure Containment Initiative could be considered a predecessor to the SCP Foundation, active for the majority of the first half of the 20th century. While most of the stories go that the ASCI, alongside several other paranormal investigation organizations, eventually came together and formed the SCP Foundation in the early 50s, the reality is a lot murkier. As we all know, it's very hard to completely kill off an organization in the anomalous world. The secrecy and decentralization practically ensures that there's always going to be some stragglers left. And in the ASCI's case, that certainly seems to be the case. SCP-378's file indicates that by 1963, the ASCI was still around and kicking, though it was definitely living on borrowed time due to the rising prominence of the SCP Foundation. The two organizations, the growing Foundation and the dying ASCI, attempted to keep tabs on one another throughout the decade, but the Foundation's espionage programs proved to be more intensive and thorough. For whatever reason, the Foundation was always getting the best intel, whether it was beating the ASCI to the punch on newly discovered anomalies, gaining access to otherwise classified information only available in ASCI documents of the highest security clearances, or finding ways to benefit from the organization's detriments through diplomatic meetings that always seemed to work in the Foundation's favor. It was clear that the SCP Foundation was the new hotness, and the ASCI would have a lot of catching up to do if it wanted to remain relevant in this new post-World War II world. Unfortunately, we all know what happened. The majority of the ASCI was absorbed into the Foundation shortly after its formation, and the pieces that remained would fade into obscurity in the coming years. But why was the Foundation's intel so good? More funding? Better trained agents? Luck? The answer, if you're familiar with the Foundation's ways, shouldn't come as a surprise. Of course, there was always going to be more going on behind the scenes, and that's where SCP-378 comes in. SCP-378 is an arthropod resembling an Amazonian giant centipede, specifically one in the larval stage. SCP-378 measures about 3 meters long, with a thickness of 233 kilograms, and it possesses otherwise ordinary biological features, while about as normal as an anomaly contained by the SCP Foundation can get. On the dietary side, it eats like a normal centipede, consuming primarily other insects and lichen. On the reproductive side, things are a bit different. SCP-378 reproduces asexually, meaning that it's capable of generating offspring entirely through its own biological functions, which it excretes from its backside. A newly birthed instance, designated SCP-378-A, resembles a fully grown adult Amazonian giant centipede right from birth. But dissection of these baby peds suggests that this resemblance is superficial, as SCP-378-A's organ systems, beyond a primitive neural network, are entirely non-existent. These babies are essentially shell organisms, intended to be used by SCP-378, the host centipede, as remote drones. And that's how SCP-378 proves to be useful to the Foundation at large. You see, 378-A are endoparasites, meaning that they're organisms that live inside other organisms, like a tapeworm, but so much worse. SCP-378-A are used by SCP-378 to infect advanced primates, such as ourselves, but also a whole host of offshoots of humanity, such as the Homo ignotus, also known as SCP-655, and the Gigantopithecus sapiens, the common Sasquatch, which you might recognize as SCP-1000. SCP-378-A enters a host through an open orifice, and after infection, the entity will integrate itself with the host's nervous system through means that are poorly understood by the Foundation. This includes brain death of the host, and extending SCP-378's remote control through its offspring and into the host itself. Vital functions and sensory input remain unaffected, meaning that the host still retains some semblance of life function. Just, without a brain or anything. They're not there. They're just puppets, but you'll never be able to tell. When you think of someone being puppeted by an anomalous parasite, you'd probably expect them to act a little weird. Maybe they don't speak right, or maybe they start slithering on the floor or eating only small lizards. But that's not the case with victims of SCP-378. No. Once its offspring have infected a suitable host, SCP-378 will actually do a pretty decent job of integrating its victims back into their respective social sphere. This means maintaining all of their previous relationships as best as possible, such as keeping their jobs, and otherwise fitting in and not standing above the crowd. You'd probably assume they prefer to keep a low profile, mainly infecting hosts in small towns and sleepy suburbs, but you'd be wrong there too. SCP-378 loves the big city, places with high population density, and a robust entertainment scene. We'll explain later, but SCP-378 differs from ordinary insects in that its base instinct isn't to just infect and reproduce, it's to have fun. And the way it entertains itself is by living the lives of people who otherwise live busy, engaging lives, filled with plenty of social interactivity and places to go. The Foundation has yet to discover the upper limit of SCP-378, as the centipede has managed to infect quite a number of hosts with its offspring, which it all seems to maintain simultaneously without issue. Upon interrogation of a host, SCP-378 confesses to the existence of 26 human hosts, 2 instances of Guatemalan black howler monkeys, and 3 instances of SCP-1000. Considering the complex social hierarchies of monkeys, it's unsurprising that SCP-378 infected a few of them just to try them out, on top of infecting a few Sasquatches in the form of SCP-1000, which SCP-378 conveniently is immune to the inherent anomalous effects of. But there is no question as to which species SCP-378 prefers. In fact, those other things it infected, according to the host, were only acquired during periods of heavy intoxication. See, the centipede enjoys getting a little tipsy too. You can't have that in the Amazon rainforest. As humanity is the dominant species on Earth, we're the ones with the shiniest toys for SCP-378 to play with, the most exciting lives, filled with more pointless interaction and labor than a bug would know what to do with. And that's what makes SCP-378 so intriguing for the Foundation. It's an intelligent parasite, whose only motivation is to keep society running as normal so it can slip behind a few pairs of human eyes and see what it's like in the world it would never get to otherwise live in. Some of you are already thinking it, but SCP-378 is the perfect anomaly for the Foundation to use against its foes and adversaries. And as we covered earlier, in the 1960s, the Foundation had a lot to prove, mainly against the American Secure Containment Initiative. The Foundation knew to classify SCP-378 as a Thaumiel-class object. It was promptly contained in an underground terrarium filled with plenty of juicy lichen and ants for SCP-378 to feed on. Of course, there was also a decontamination chamber constructed adjacent to the regular containment chamber. Any personnel who would go in would obviously be at risk to an infection from SCP-378, and we're sure that living the crazy, exciting life of a Foundation agent would have satisfied the sociable bug. But the SCP Foundation wasn't taking any risks. As a result, anyone entering the chamber would have to wear full body protection, and if they were found to be infected during the decontamination process, they would be terminated. After discovery of SCP-378, the Foundation immediately saw the potential in utilizing the anomaly for espionage purposes. After all, it would be a perfect spy network, capable of fitting in and maintaining ordinary roles while also communicating with SCP-378, who would feed information to the Foundation through another host. The impeccable precision of SCP-378's maintenance of its host's social personas would make the entity almost impenetrable to sniff out in the field. even for trained agents who deal with the anomalous. SCP-378's initial psychological evaluation was performed by the well-known Foundation psychologist, Dr. Simon Glass. Dr. Glass found that SCP-378 was obviously unique among arthropods and possessed either human level of sapience, or at the very least, the ability to emulate its host's intellectual faculties. Regardless, the anomaly was intelligent, but a point of interest for Dr. Glass was SCP-378's relationship with its hosts. It maintained a constant, consistent sense of identity across multiple hosts. But interviews with SCP-378 revealed that it was fully aware that it was not those hosts in actuality. SCP-378 was essentially role-playing various human identities. It wasn't just easy for the Foundation to figure out that the centipede enjoyed masquerading as its hosts. It pretty much spelled it out with giant letters. SCP-378's hosts rarely interact with or send information directly back to SCP-378 or fellow hosts, because SCP-378 is in full control at all times. This is literally just a game for SCP-378, a source of entertainment. And if one of those hosts came under duress or was at risk of being found out by those in its life, 378 could easily abandon the host persona, which it had no issues in doing. Dr. Glass found that the host behavior was largely unique to each instance, and extroverted personalities were a favorite for SCP-378. Hosts rarely isolate themselves, except to sleep or use the bathroom, and SCP-378 appeared to take equal enthusiasm in both stressful and pleasant situations. After all, this was all a big role-playing session for it. SCP-378 appreciated some excitement in the lives of its subjects. In a way, this was like an infinite source of entertainment. You could live as many lives as you wanted at once, have almost no attachment to any consequences, because you're a bug who has no stake in the real world, and you get to experience things no other member of your species ever has or ever will. SCP-378 really is living the dream. Even to another human, this sounds pretty fun. We only get one life to live. SCP-378 gets to live as many as it wants. But Dr. Glass found another interesting fact about SCP-378. It was attached to a certain identity. Lisa Martin, a 33-year-old Mexican-American female employee at Digiana Tono's Pies, a pizza chain located in Staten Island, New York. Dr. Glass was a bit unsure as to why SCP-378 enjoyed Miss Martin so much, but it was clear from the way it talked about her that this was its favorite persona. And Dr. Glass could see why the more he studied Martin's routine. It was the perfect mixture of business, idleness, routine labor, and general engagement for SCP-378 to experience. Lisa Martin's routine was static. On every day except Saturday, from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m., Lisa Martin would show up to work at Digiana Tono's Pies. After she finished work, from 6 p.m. to 11 p.m., Martin would engage in maintenance of one of 17 rooftop gardens across New York City. Of these gardens, Glass discovered that 13 are maintained by volunteer organizations, 12 of which Martin was not a part of. On Saturdays from 8 a.m. to 11 p.m., Martin alternated between socializing with a collection of friends and coworkers and playing piano for various high-end bars. On all days from 11 p.m. to 12 a.m., Martin would shower and then prepare for bed. She would sleep from 12 a.m. to 7 a.m., and in the morning she'd get back up and do it all over again. When you see a person's schedule laid out like this, everything seems a bit more routine and less exciting, huh? It's not an exciting life laid out on paper, but SCP-378 loved it for whatever reasons. Attempts to interrupt Lisa Martin's routine were unilaterally met with unusual levels of hostility from the bug and its hosts, and in the event of Lisa Martin's death, SCP-378 would happily direct another host to assume her identity. Yeah, we're not sure either. Regardless, 378 had a hobby, many hobbies, but Lisa Martin was special. Dr. Glass's evaluation proved to be popular with the upper ranks of the Foundation, who, due to SCP-378's intelligence and awareness of human sentience, could prove to be useful to the overall mission of the Foundation. As we said before, in 1963, the Foundation had to contend with a number of powerful adjacent organizations, the Global Occult Coalition, with their destructive tendencies and the backing of the world governments, GRU Division P, the Soviet Union's Anomalous Research Military Unit, the remnants of the American Secure Containment Initiative, who, while not as prominent or as powerful as they used to be, still remained an organization capable of deterring the Foundation. As a result, the Foundation looked into applying SCP-378 through practical means. Dr. Glass's work importance could not be understated, but the prevailing theory was that SCP-378 did not understand the significance of social dynamics in regards to hierarchy and social capital. This could be observed in its strange defense of Lisa Martin. Several of SCP-378's hosts held positions of power, two of which, David Lockheed and Alfonso Leos, were even employed by anomalous organizations, and beyond the reach of the Foundation's then capacity to contain. Even holding these powerful positions, SCP-378 displayed a willingness to sacrifice the hosts to defend, replace, or otherwise maintain Lisa Martin, its favorite host. It was here when the Foundation saw an opportunity. If they could use SCP-378's favoritism of Martin to get it to do what they wanted, their dream spy network had a chance of manifesting into reality. David Lockheed, one of SCP-378's hosts, was a low-level employee of the ASCI, but if the Foundation was able to persuade SCP-378, using Martin's safety as collateral, Lockheed could rise through the ranks of the organization into a position where the Foundation needed a puppet. Second, they realized that Martin herself could prove to be a useful asset. The Foundation was always looking for new ways to conduct reconnaissance, and pizza parlors were an ideal meeting spot and espionage center, if they could be kept from the public eye. Martin's place of employment would soon be converted from your average Staten Island pizza parlor to one of the Foundation's very own spicy crust pizza chains. See what they did there? Spicy crust pizza, SCP. They are so clever. Regardless, the use of SCP-378's anomalous abilities to defend Foundation operatives in the United States seemed like a useful prospect, and the idea was put to a vote by the Overseer Council. It passed, with only minor detraction, under the name of the Kraken Protocol. As a result, SCP-378's containment procedures were updated, and containment of the anomaly would be focused on three primary components. Its first host, SCP-378-1, was held in the Area 19 barracks of the SCP Foundation. -1 was employed as a maintenance technician with a low security clearance, and in the case of death, a brain-dead or comatose reserve personnel would be elected to replace it. SCP-378-1 served as the Foundation's primary means of communication with SCP-378. After all, they needed a channel to speak directly to the bug in charge, and -1 was their way of doing so. SCP-378-2 was David Lockheed, an average employee of the American Secure Containment Initiative, working in their clerical sector. Lockheed was tasked with sabotaging ASCI operations for the Foundation, as well as collecting information in the Foundation's interests. SCP-378-2 was a little more difficult to replace than the average SCP-378 host, and was required to follow a strict health and exercise regimen. If something were to happen to Lockheed, there's no telling if the Foundation would be able to replace him, and the chances of that happening were low. Lockheed was the perfect spy, with an established rapport with the ASCI going back at least a decade, and access to information the Foundation would use to outsmart the initiative at every turn. It shouldn't come as a surprise to you that the ASCI's days were numbered, and eventually, they closed their doors entirely. SCP-378-3 was Lisa Martin, who worked at Spicy Crust Pizza in Staten Island. Martin's purpose was to maintain a network for Foundation operatives in New York and host a place where they could congregate and meet without issue. On top of that, Martin was still SCP-378's favorite persona, and the entire operation hinged on SCP-378 having Martin available to it. As a result, Lisa Martin would have to be replaced as soon as possible if anything were to happen to her. And with that, the Kraken Protocol was in place. Each instant formed a part of the Foundation's information gathering campaign, and was outfitted with a tracking device and an audio recorder. Every week, embedded agents stationed near each host were to evaluate the health and integrity of them, and the equipment they had inside them. If this initial rollout was a success, the Foundation would continue to use SCP-378-A in further infiltration of its enemies, but the Foundation would have to see how things played out first. Less than 2 years later, Lockheed had retrieved significant information for the Foundation, and the Kraken Protocol proved to be a success. A new site, Site 56, located near prominent anomalous locations, was about to be constructed. SCP-378 seemed excited at the prospects of a change in scenery and more hosts to infiltrate, but there was also something the Foundation could never have expected. In an attempt to gain a new host for SCP-378 to control, the Foundation came across something disturbing. Their target was an agent of the FBI's Unusual Incident Unit. After drugging him and bringing him back to the Foundation in order to receive an SCP-378-A instance inside him, SCP-378 informed the Foundation that it couldn't establish a connection with the agent. The personnel were confused. The agent was still alive, and 378 never had any difficulty in connecting with hosts before. They did a number of tests on the agent and tried to figure out what went wrong. That's when the Foundation discovered that there was a different centipede inside the agent's head, where the SCP-378-A instance would typically be. It looked like the Foundation had a much bigger issue on their hand than they ever had realized.
A hunter was found dead, murdered with his own gun. A farmhouse left to rot, his family having met the same fate. But with no clear motive to carry out such a grim deed, who could possibly be the killer? On a totally unrelated note, at Research Sector 71 resides SCP-1793, a small and adorably fuzzy male Oryctolagus conculeus, or, in layman's terms, European rabbit. Surrounded by several gravimeters and housed in a mammal containment cell, such high security regarding SCP-1793 could be taken as a bit overkill, as nothing about the bunny seems particularly unnatural, but SCP-1793 is no ordinary rabbit. On the surface, nothing seems particularly striking in regards to the creature. Thought to be around 9 years old, SCP-1793 is aging at the same rate any normal rabbit would, but due to an unfortunate structural heart defect known as pulmonic stenosis, and to prevent any significant containment failure, SCP-1793 has been assigned its very own veterinary practitioner. Alongside a selection of varied fresh vegetables, SCP-1793 is provided with a veterinary-approved rabbit mix due to its condition, as well as the appropriate medical and nutritional supplementation it needs to keep healthy, or at least as healthy as it can be. Spend any amount of time observing SCP-1793, however, and its unnatural attributes begin to rear their head. Though deemed non-harmful in nature, SCP-1793 possesses the ability to, through spatial anomalies, manifest material objects at will. A pattern in the objects created is yet to be distinguished, but so far, site staff have witnessed the rabbit craft a large array of items, from foodstuffs to electronic devices to cultural artifacts to carrots. Because, duh, of course. Despite looking normal in nature, items created by the uniquely gifted SCP-1793 aren't completely ordinary. Similar to how SCP-1793 presents itself in an unexceptional way, objects manifested by the cuddly little rabbit are said to emit Cherenkov radiation while being produced, found to be in the purple-blue range of visible light. However, the spatial anomalies SCP-1793 whips up contain the exact same gravitational mass as the items they appear to mimic, and ultimately have been concluded as non-harmful. For example, if the rabbit wants to spawn a parsnip, the parsnip manifested has the same weight as a real parsnip, grown by real farmers and not by a cosmically gifted bunny. Different items have different processing times. Rabbit-spawned electrical or mechanical devices take around 15 minutes to produce, whereas foodstuffs such as beetroot, rutabaga, or even a cheeseburger, if he really wanted to treat himself, takes around 30 minutes. Interestingly enough, mimics of cultural items are able to be spawned almost instantaneously. Too bad on the wait time for that cheeseburger. I could actually really go for one. All items manifested seem to be pristine and in working order, and most, if not all times, every item produced leans on the recreational side of things, aesthetically pleasing though not innately needed. It's cool to have a copy of the Mona Lisa, but it kind of cramps the style of the facility. If given the chance, SCP-1793 also possesses the ability to manipulate nearby objects, all without physically interacting with them. So far, changes to already existing items have been small and non-threatening, like the altering of a can label to say lemon lime instead of cola,
or giving a computer an extra key. Due to the consistent nature of such creations constantly spawning within SCP-1793's containment cell, observing staff have approved of the rabbit keeping a few select items, albeit small enough to fit within the room without issue. The rest of the items are to be withdrawn from the cell and kept in storage, awaiting proper analysis. Popular items of choice spawned by SCP-1793 are, not surprisingly, food. When hungry and late to be fed, SCP-1793 will manifest its favorite treat, a vegetable, to quell his hungry hankering. But despite their normal outward appearance, foodstuffs made by the rabbit are less than nutritionally dense. Upon further scientific and chemical inspection, vegetables, fruits, and the occasional biscuit spawned by SCP-1793 show higher fibrous content in relation to their real-world wild counterparts. Though not proven, as SCP-1793 is still provided with real food by the facility, it has been determined that if left to its own meal-making devices, the rabbit could not self-sustain off its own munchy manifestations. A years-long occupant of Research Sector 71, SCP-1793 never raised any real cause for concern. Many items spawned by SCP-1793 were even considered a great form of entertainment. For example, the rabbit once manifested a TV without a remote, which would have seemed inconvenient if not left on a fun game show channel. SCP-1793 even spawned a plate of Swedish meatballs, filling the sector with its deliciously aromatic scent, though perhaps in relation to SCP-3008 Infinite IKEA, staff will never know for certain. Several facility members tasked with keeping an eye on SCP-1793 grew quite fond of the rabbit, enjoying its peaceful and cuddly demeanor, albeit from afar. SCP-1793's personal vet practitioner also approved of its docile behavior and was deeply saddened by the fact that, due to its pulmonary heart disorder, his time on Earth is limited, and he might not live on for much longer. The creature's presence made many members of personnel joyous, or more appropriately, and in this particular instance, happy. But on February 27, 1996, an addendum had to be made, as SCP-1793's behavior grew concerningly odd. On one non-particular morning, an onslaught of never-before-seen items appeared all around Research Sector 71, in rooms, on chairs, in shelves, and on walls. Through discussions with staff, it was confirmed no human could possibly be responsible for the sector's sudden influx of decor, given the amount was too large for any singular person to sneak in. With April being months away, this surely was no Fool's Day prank. After careful consideration and some security camera review, all logical conclusions pointed to one irrefutable culprit, SCP-1793. The detailed list of items spawned within Researcher Sector 71 are as follows. 1 was a set of 3 FV-4034 Challenger 2 main battle tanks, all of which were missing several parts, such as the main gun and its firing mechanisms. Not only were the tanks functionally disabled, something noted as odd, as all of SCP-1793's previous manifestations have been in working order, but they were equally missing their armor. Upon inspection of the main barrel, a discovery of an inscription had been made reading, "Intentionally disabled by the Gilisi 445 Board for Arms Non-Distribution." The second onslaught of items manifested by SCP-1793 were 82 full-size copies of Edward Hopper's Nighthawks, a 20th century painting often detailed as eerie due to the isolated nature of the piece. In the middle of the night, surrounded by a barren United States city, Nighthawks depicts 4 lonesome subjects congregating in a fluorescently lit bar. The subject matter of the piece isn't particularly jovial either, tapping into the paranoia shrouding New York City after the attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941. Why SCP-1793 spawned not 1 but 82 copies of the piece is still unknown. The only other item spawned by SCP-1793 during the 1996 incident was deemed the oddest of them all, a single, completely normal King Edward potato. Researchers traversed the halls of Research Sector 71 absolutely terrified. None of the manifested items seemed to have any relation to one another, and staff struggled to make sense of the massive collection surrounding them. Concerned, researchers quickly visited the holding cell of SCP-1793 and were instructed to review the containment's gravimeters. Revealed upon inspection was a massive spatial anomaly within SCP-1793's cell, bigger than had ever been recorded before. At approximately 100,000 kilograms, or 220,000 pounds, this gravitational mass constructed by SCP-1793 has yet to be beat, and hopefully never will be. SCP-1793 sat idle in its containment cell, unsettlingly still. With eyes wide open, conscious but unmoving, and in a presumed state of extreme concentration, the rabbit's personal vet practitioner feared that due to such intense manifestational feats, his heart could be at risk of failure. But all would soon be over, as SCP-1793's catatonic state eventually ended at a staggeringly long 47 consecutive hours, and manifested in the process was a single sheet of rough paper to prove it. What was on the paper, however, revealed something startlingly out of character for the once harmless bunny. Not too long ago, in a lone farmhouse near Whitby in the United Kingdom, lived a farmer and his family on a land prime with vegetation, fertile soil, and, most importantly, lots of rabbits. A farmer by day and a hunter by night, the countryman would often brandish his shotgun and head out for an evening excursion, searching for a bunny well-suited to feed his family. The man was good at what he did, and he was feared by forest life, bringing back several rabbits on the nightly, sufficient to plate a proper dinner. But this time, the forest, it seemed, had had enough. Dinner was served amongst the family per usual, and the farmer's shotgun hung proudly on the wall. Looming over the table, it was his most prized possession, truly one of a kind, or at least it was, until he heard a thump-like knock on the house's entryway. At such a late hour, the huntsman cautiously opened the door and was met with not a friendly visitor, but the barrel of his own shotgun. Turning to check his own wall, but realizing the weapon had never left its place from above the table, the farmer was perplexed until he could think no more. In a fit of rage, the perpetrator shot the huntsman dead, his family soon to meet the exact same grisly fate. Due to the loud nature of the gunshots, authorities were called to the scene, but to everyone's dismay, no suspects were found. After a sweep of the farm grounds and due to the odd nature of the situation, members of the Foundation's mobile task force were called on to investigate the area. Through inspection, the only anomaly of note was an exact duplicate of the huntsman's gun, the same one that hung over the dinner table, right down to the nicks and scratches on the barrel. But shortly after this revelation, another oddity was discovered. An idly sitting rabbit, found not quite too far from the farmhouse, wearing a collar with a low-powered radio beacon attached. Not quite sure of the correlation between the creature and the events that transpired at the house, the MTF was quick to take him in, preferring not to take any chances. He has been detained within Foundation walls to this very day. For a long and uncomfortable while, the farmhouse murder was nothing more than unsolvable. No fingerprints, discernible motive, or any other incriminating evidence left at the scene. Due to being found in such close proximity to the murders, theories were to be had over SCP-1793's involvement in the case, but nothing ever served as concrete. After the 1996 incident at Research Sector 71, however, those doubts over the Happy Bunny's involvement were about to change. During its 47 hours of deep concentration, SCP-1793 conjured the aforementioned rough piece of paper, detailing the events that transpired at the farmhouse on that one grisly night. The letter reads as follows.
I am sorry for the confusion. It is difficult to concentrate. It is difficult to write as well. I am a rabbit, you see.
Amongst the 3 tanks, 1 potato, and 82 copies of Nighthawks hung about the sector walls, researchers continued reading, perplexed. Having never thought amongst its many other abilities, the rabbit was capable of written communication.
I am sorry for the farmer. Family for a family, I thought at the time. Seeing him eat my wife and son, you can understand. After the mess, I met a man. Well, he wasn't a man. The 3 heads gave that away. He gave me the means to live out my waning days in comfort before my weak heart gives out. He told me he would find suitable wardens to care for me as I die. I don't know if the criminals should choose their punishment, but from what I'm told, this is the nicest prison for those like me. If you ever see him, tell him I say thank you before you lock him away.
At the bottom of the page lay one more sentence.
Oh, and thank you for the carrots. They never do get those right.
After all these years, a confession was made, and by a rabbit, no less. Angered by the slaughter of his own family, the rabbit had taken an eye for an eye, And now, as quick as it happened, the farmhouse murder could be put to rest, at least within top-secret Foundation walls. Though for years he made the staff smile, the happy bunny was not so happy after all. Well aware of his heart condition and impending doom, SCP-1793 wanted to be captured for his guilty crime, living out the rest of his days in the Foundation rather than traversing the lonely woods he and his family used to dwell in. Unbeknownst to authorities, the culprit had turned himself in from the very beginning, and the truth was just under their noses, and now, at least, in written form. SCP-1793 remains in Research Sector 71 to this very day. No other incidents similar to the 1996 event have been reported, but many staff members prefer not to recall the details, as ridding the building of the mass amount of items SCP-1793 manifested was presumably a tedious nightmare, except for the potato, of course. Fortunately for Research Sector 71 staff, SCP-1793's behavior remains steady and peaceful in nature, albeit a bit inconvenient at times, mostly due to its conjuring things outside its cell. Manifested items are back to the usual kind. Small cell phones, root vegetables, picture frames, exercise equipment, no more cheeseburgers, but maybe someday. All manifestation times have remained steady from when first documented as well, and the rabbit shows no outward aggression or intent on harming anyone it comes across. However, due to the 1996 incident and the confession to the farmhouse family murders, SCP-1793 has been officially classified as Euclid. SCP-1793's personal veterinary practitioner assumes that SCP-1793 does not have much time left to live. His heart condition worsens by the day, but at least his closing moments on Earth will surely be comfortable, somewhat cushy, and full of carrots, all the while behind containment walls. Whether or not SCP-1793 still guiltily dwells on the crime it committed is unknown, as no new printed letters have been conjured, and any further attempts to communicate via written words have been null. However, it does seem to be satisfied with its choice of incarceration. The SCP Foundation has yet to track down the three-headed anomaly the rabbit detailed in its written confession, the one that coaxed SCP-1793 to turn himself in to be detained. The staff is perplexed that the undocumented creature is aware of the Foundation's existence, and, as of now, has deemed this level of awareness as a potential threat. The whereabouts of this creature is unknown, but staff are doing their due diligence to make sure it is found, starting its search around the farmhouse where presumably it met with SCP-1793 for the first time. A happy bunny. Happy, or so it seemed. How long SCP-1793 has left for this Earth is ultimately up for his waning heart to decide. Why he doesn't just manifest a new one for himself is, for now, untold.
How could you do this?
Dr. Wondertainment said, lower lip trembling in rage.
To your own father! Working with those SCP Foundation dogs!
Sorry, Dad,
said Mr. Fish, his thick Boston accent quavering out beyond his fishy lack of lips. He was holding a handgun, spray-painted purple and covered in yellow rhinestones.
It's the way it's gotta be.
But Dr. Wondertainment wasn't having that. His offended sneer devolved into a monstrous snarl, and he pressed a button on top of his cane. Section by section, the outer casing rose up, revealing the glimmering purple sword beneath. To Mr. Fish's surprise, the doctor lifted up the blade with a swift flick of his wrist, assuming a fighting stance. As if to answer a question that wasn't asked, he said, "Official Dr. Wondertainment cane sword, one of our best-selling products. The children love it." He gave a baleful cry and lunged for the fish-headed anomaly. How could this have happened? One of Dr. Wondertainment's own creations, one of the iconic Little Misters line, working against him, perhaps even plotting his death. It's a wild story, and it all began in an Irish pub near the Boston docks, where a certain Mr. Fish was at least living up to his name in his ability to drink. Surrounded by surly Boston dock workers, Mr. Fish, in his finely tailored black suit with his bright orange goldfish head, knocked back a third tankard, pouring the golden liquid down his fishy gullet. Nobody asked any questions. You see types like him in Massachusetts and Rhode Island, folks with an Innsmouth look. Most people just assumed their great-great-grandma must have had a wild night with Dagon and forgot her morning after pill. It's not the kind of thing that's really all that polite to ask about. But Mr. Fish drew attention to himself in his own way. One of the two TVs in the bar was playing a Celtics game, a game that Mr. Fish had a not inconsiderable part of his latest pay packet riding on with a local bookie, and the C's were letting him down. He yelled at the screen, shaking his human fist, until a pair of salty sea dogs trudged over to tell him to shut his trap, so the rest of them could relax. With typical Bostonian warmth and good humor, he responded by smashing his latest glass over the side of their heads. In return, they knocked several shades of caca out of Mr. Fish. The bartender, who pulled out a shotgun from under the bar and racked a round into the chamber to stop the fight, called the cops on him. Said cops, radioing in that the perp had an abnormally large head of a goldfish, got him transferred over to the SCP Foundation. Given the Lovecraftian history of Boston, the Foundation had multiple agents embedded in Boston PD, with an eye towards any anomalies eldritch or aquatic in nature. By the time Mr. Fish had sobered up, he was sitting in a chair across from a stern-faced Foundation researcher, looking at him down the bridge of his nose. This was Dr. Baker, and according to him, Mr. Fish's new name was SCP-527. Baker said, "Thank you for your cooperation thus far, SCP-527. We're just using this interview as a way to gauge any potential anomalous behavior we might not expect." "All right," Mr. Fish replied. "To begin, are you capable of breathing underwater?" "No." "Are you capable of communicating with other fish or with other sea-based life forms?" "No." Dr. Baker took notes on his clipboard. "I see," he said. "When did you first discover your condition? Were you by any chance attacked or bitten by a fish you didn't recognize, or experience an encounter with a sea-based deity of some kind?" These questions were starting to irritate Mr. Fish, especially as he was still recovering from his combination hangover and fight headache. "No," Mr. Fish repeated. Well then. You've been like this since birth?" "Yep." "I am all right. Do you know of any other anomalous traits you might exhibit?" Mr. Fish sighed and said, "Sure don't. Like I told the other guy, this is all it is. You're looking at it. Lies, stripes, hot sweetie, they got all the good stuffs. I'm just a guy with a fish head." Dr. Baker, seemingly rather disappointed and yet relieved with an outcome like this, "Do you have any idea why your creator might have fashioned you in this way?" All Mr. Fish could do was shrug. What you saw with him truly was what you got. But in a way, this made him the most predictable of the little misters that they had in containment. And given that he'd been cursed with such a dumb, anomalous ability, and yet had an awareness of the other little misters, could make him a unique asset to the Foundation in their quest against one of the most enduring groups of interest, the enigmatic, anomalous toymaker, Dr. Wondertainment. And that was exactly how the deal was struck. Dr. Baker, after speaking with the administration, decided to offer Mr. Fish a deal. They would release him and make it seem as though he escaped from Foundation containment so that he could return to Dr. Wondertainment. From there, he would be their man on the inside, helping them take down Dr. Wondertainment's sprawling organization from within. Once the mission was completed successfully, they would give him the best anomalous treatment that money could buy to reshape his body and give him a real human head. How could Mr. Fish possibly say no to an offer like that? They staged a containment breach a week after that, allowing Mr. Fish to break free from the facility and run out into the nearby desert, where the arid winds admittedly felt terrible on his scales. He walked for miles in the night, knowing that if he was given too easy a ride, then Dr. Wondertainment might just smell something fishy. Mr. Fish reached a nearby town the next day and made his way to the nearest toy store. There, he approached the clerk and said the words, "When your world is down and you're needing escape, know in your head is a wonderful place." With that, the clerk nodded and opened the door to the toy store's stockroom. Except if you looked closely, you'd see that the air in the doorway was shimmering slightly, a telltale sign that a portal is at play. Mr. Fish took a deep breath. There would be no coming back from this if he failed, and stepped across the threshold. When he opened his eyes, he was standing in the Technicolor wonderland of one of Dr. Wondertainment's anomalous toy factories. It was only moments later that the doctor himself sauntered in, his cane tapping against the ground with every step, twirling his mustache with his free hand. "Well, well, well, the prodigal son returns,"
Dr. Wondertainment said. "I hope you take no offense to this, my boy, but of all the ones I thought would be able to escape one of those damned Foundation lockboxes, I never expected that it would be you." Mr. Fish didn't take offense, not really, especially given that he hadn't actually escaped the base on his own. "Still," Dr. Wondertainment said, "it is wonderful to have you back. We have much work to do, and many hands do have the power to make that work an awful lot lighter." And so began Mr. Fish's work undercover for the SCP Foundation, appearing loyal to his creator while working to undermine him. He was immediately put to work on the factory floor, putting together anomalous toys on conveyor belts. In accordance with the SCP Foundation's wishes, he gathered up schematics of the differing toys and discreetly sent them back to his Foundation handlers, all while sabotaging or delaying production in any way he could, breaking machines, putting the wrong parts into anomalous toys, giving his subordinates bad instructions. When the time came to lay the blame at someone's feet, Mr. Fish blamed another worker who was actually one of the more competent and committed members of the team. Dr. Wondertainment strapped him to a giant firework and shot him up into the sky, causing a spectacular explosion that incinerated the man in the process. Mr. Fish rose through the ranks after that, becoming part of the brainstorming team for new products. This was perfect for his newfound job as a Foundation mole, as it allowed him to send them the details of all upcoming design projects in order for them to develop proper countermeasures in advance. They'd have containment methods devised for anomalies before those anomalies were even made. On the instruction of the Foundation, Mr. Fish requested a job change to the logistics department of the company. This allowed him to view all the files on where upcoming shipments of anomalous toys were being sent, letting him, in turn, tip off the Foundation about both the locations where the toys were being sent and the nature of some of Dr. Wondertainment's most valuable shipping routes. It resulted in some of the most successful Foundation sting operations on record, taking tens of thousands of anomalous toys off the market. Of course, Mr. Fish was never caught. With the help from the Foundation, he always found another, inevitably more loyal employee to blame his treachery on, who Dr. Wondertainment, in a rage, would always whimsically annihilate before they could share their side of the story. And every time, Mr. Fish got a little closer to Dr. Wondertainment himself. After all, there was nobody that Wondertainment would trust more than one of his very own creations. From the Foundation's perspective, Mr. Fish went on from one of the most useless little misters to their most valuable asset on the inside. But the problem was, he wasn't the only inside man operating out there. You see, the Foundation is one of the most powerful spying organizations in the world. They have eyes everywhere, between AI constructs and web crawlers studying every nook and cranny of the internet, and embedded field agents and paid-off informants in every layer of government, every organization, every group of interest. But no system is watertight, and sometimes the apparent omniscience of the Foundation can blind it to the presence of spies in its own midst. They never imagined that an enemy as whimsically devious as Dr. Wondertainment would have a spy of his own hidden in their midst. But that was very much the case of Wally Watley, one of the good doctor's minions hidden in the Foundation's administrative department. With all the recent hardships that the Foundation had been facing, Dr. Wondertainment had put a great deal of pressure on Wally to find out why the Foundation had gotten so lucky, and why so many of his own employees had been failing him. He knew that it had to be those killjoys at the Foundation interfering. He just needed to discover the nature of that interference before he could do anything about it. And that's when Wally Watley, at a late night pouring through the archives, discovered some correspondence between the Foundation and one of their anomalous contacts, someone embedded in the heart of Dr. Wondertainment's operation, feeding information to his greatest rivals, a bona fide double agent. Wally delivered this information to Dr. Wondertainment, though he had no way of knowing who the Foundation mole actually was. Still, the doc felt disrespected, and that made him furious. Who dared stand in the way of his noble goal, bringing joy to the children of the world? It was perverse. It was evil. He would find whoever did this, and he would make them suffer in all the worst ways his considerable imagination could fathom. There was just the matter of catching the rat first. And so began the great purge of the Wondertainment organization,
Toy soldiers with real functioning rifles march through the halls, interrogating anyone who seems suspicious and putting them to the immediate firing wall if they didn't have satisfactory answers. Toy Spitfires sailed through the air, unleashing tiny machine gun fire and barrages of missiles on anyone who dared to run. The higher-ranking workers at the company were told to report directly to Dr. Wondertainment's office, one by one, for interrogation with the man himself, and he had ways of making them talk. If someone struck Dr. Wondertainment as untrustworthy, he'd shake their hand with a joy buzzer that reduced them to a pile of ash on the ground. He'd release snapping clockwork dentures that would devour them alive. Some he'd even use his patented Dr. Wondertainment Chinese finger trap, which slowly sucks in your entire body, starting with your finger, and traps you in the hell dimension of eternal torment. As the Wondertainment purge claimed more and more victims, Mr. Fish found himself growing increasingly nervous. He knew he wasn't the kind of guy who could keep his cool under torture. Would Dr. Wondertainment even resort to something like that? The scariest part was that truly anything felt possible now, and the Foundation seemingly had no incentive to protect Mr. Fish beyond his usefulness as an asset to their plans. This hard-working Boston Goldfish man needed to act, or risk being acted upon. That's why he took one of Dr. Wondertainment Bedazzlegats from the storage room and decided that it was a simple matter of self-preservation. He needed to kill his creator before his creator had a chance to kill him. It really was as simple as that when all was said and done. He stormed into Dr. Wondertainment's office and pointed the gun in his face, which brings us full circle to where we were at the start of this video. Dr. Wondertainment, always having a flair for the dramatic, drew his cane sword and began a relentless assault against his own creation.
I made you, you ungrateful little fish!
He said with another swing.
And I can unmake you with far less effort!
Mr. Fish tried firing his weapon, but every bullet seemed to miss, Dr. Wondertainment dodging around them like living mist. With every strike, he got closer to leaving Mr. Fish sleeping with the fishes. One slash with the blade rendered a wound across the little mister's chest, collapsing him to the ground.
Always a terrible shame,
Dr. Wondertainment said, raising his weapon,
to break a beloved toy.
Before he could bring it down, sniper fire shattered through the window. Wondertainment scattered as Foundation operatives repelled into the factory to extract Mr. Fish, having narrowly avoided a gruesome death. It seemed that working for the SCP Foundation really did have its perks. When you think of the biggest, most money-making, merchandised, and capitalized game series of all time, there's only one franchise that comes to mind: Pokémon. For the entirety of its lifespan, Pokémon has been a financial powerhouse, and every year the series seems to grow in popularity and revenue. Whether it's games, cards, a show, toys, or even Pokémon-branded clothes that you need, you'll have no difficulty finding a product that appeals to you. Everyone knows Pikachu's face, and nearly every child born within the past 20 years has had a first-hand experience with Pokémon. It is, in some respects, inescapable. If you hate Pokémon, too bad, because this little electric mouse runs the world, and you'll just have to sit back and deal with it. One could even say that Pokémon is uncontainable, which poses quite the issue for the SCP Foundation, who work tirelessly to ensure that no facet of life is withheld from its reach. But the Foundation rarely deals with major franchises, beloved by millions upon millions of people across the world, and for good reason too. An anomaly tied in with a major franchise poses a lot of problems on the containment side, namely its ability to spread uncontrollably and without care, being witnessed by countless individuals before the Foundation comes up with a way to contain it. Global supply lines have to be interrupted to prevent anomalous products from hitting shelves, corporate espionage committed, and most of all, a massively expensive cover-up operation to remove said products from consumers' hands. If the Foundation had to deal with an anomaly affecting the Pokémon franchise, there's no telling how out of hand it would get before they'd be able to get a handle on the situation. But in 2019, that's exactly what happened. Today we're going to be looking at SCP-5254, an anomaly dubbed Gotta Catch 'Em All in the Foundation's database. The year was 2019, the place Japan, the home country of the Pokemon franchise. Every year since 2014, the Pokemon Company has held a festival named Pikachu Outbreak in the city of Yokohama, in which hundreds of costumed actors dressed as Pikachu would crowd the city's Mirai district and perform, dance, and even participate in a parade. The event was intended to celebrate the Pokemon franchise and promote whatever the latest venture the series is pushing, whether it's a game, a movie, or something else. The festival proved to be successful and has been held every year since. After all, who wouldn't want to see a legion of Pikachu running amok through the streets? But the fun would be short-lived during the 2019 outbreak, where something incredibly unusual occurred. Picture this: a large crowd, hundreds of fans dressed in Pokemon-themed attire, standing on both sides of the streets. Men, women, children, anyone and everyone came to see the Pikachu outbreak, and they weren't disappointed. Parading down the street was a horde of Pikachu, just as advertised. They danced, bounced, and walked together in routine fashion, all while the crowd cheered and yelled. Even the spectators in the crowd showed their spirit with Pikachu-themed hats, yellow tails fastened to their backs, and yellow face masks with 2 electrified red circles on the cheeks. The parade proceeded as normal. That is, until one of the parading Pikachu started behaving oddly. It began as out-of-sync movements, strange wobbles, and deviations from the parade path. For the heavily coordinated Outbreak Festival, this was unusual. The rest of the Pikachu line danced to the beat of the music, sticking in formation as best as they could. Then, as if pushed by an invisible force, the strange Pikachu raced forward, diving headfirst into the crowd, barreling into the group of people and eventually colliding. The crowd moved out of the way, slightly shocked, no pun intended, by what had occurred. But then it happened again. 2 more Pikachu ran into the crowd, and then again. Over 15 Pikachu rammed themselves into the crowd, resulting in a massive disruption of the parade and the shutdown of the event entirely. The Foundation quickly caught wind of this and sent their closest operatives to assess the situation in a controlled fashion. After blocking off the crowd and shutting down the event, another strange detail emerged. One that ensured the Foundation that there had been some sort of anomalous significance to what was occurring here. Some of the crowd members involved in the collisions were suffering very peculiar medical injuries, namely blunt force trauma way stronger than what a clash with a costumed actor would induce, and severe electrical burns. The Foundation was positive there was something occurring here, and with a franchise as vast and popular as Pokemon, they didn't want to take any chances. Immediately, Foundation agents began collecting information on the event, setting up probes in the offices of Game Freak and the Pokemon Company, and attempting to get to the bottom of what exactly happened during the parade. When the Foundation interrogated the 15 mascots who collided with the crowd, they were shocked to learn that they weren't mascots at all, but instead fully separate entities that resembled the Pikachu costume. X-rays revealed that their once human skeletons were now fused to their costumes, and touching them produced a minor electric shock. The performers had become Pikachu, and now they were unable to be removed from their costumes. Every captured instance had expired before the Foundation was able to fully study and discern what was occurring to them, their bodies unable to support themselves after such a lethal, extreme transformation. Later observation found that the synthetic components of the costumes, such as the cotton and plastic composites, had fused into their flesh and muscle tissue. Bodily fluids were found to contain foreign DNA and numerous strange structures, to the point where an ordinary human's genetic makeup would be incomparable and unrecognizable with that affected by the anomaly. The Foundation tentatively opened a file on SCP-5254, the anomalous transformation of a human into the rough approximation of a Pokemon character, and began carrying out tests to determine what occurred during the festival. What caused SCP-5254 to manifest? It couldn't have been random, could it? The Foundation needed to know. One theory that the researchers working on the SCP-5254 file had come up with was that it was the large gathering of Pokemon-related clothing worn by the crowd that prompted the transformation. But that begged the question, why hadn't this occurred at any previous festivals or large Pokemon-related gatherings? It was a huge franchise. There were absolutely more events that had masses of costume fans donning Pokemon-related gear. Did something happen in recent years to manifest this anomaly? The only way to find out was to conduct testing. In one of the easier experiments that a D-Class personnel was tasked with carrying out, the Foundation ordered a group of them to dress entirely in Pokemon-related clothing, which the Foundation provided themselves. Some items, such as a full-bodied Gardevoir onesie, were taken from Dr. Clef's personal collection itself. No, he is not taking further questions. Anyways, with the D-Class looking utterly ridiculous in full Pokemon getup, the observing researchers began their tests. First was a D-Class outfitted solely in a Pokemon Pikachu big face with ears hat, as the product's official title stated. After standing there for 15 minutes, the Foundation determined that there was no discernible effect. Next was a Pokemon Detective Pikachu cosplaying mask latex, which the Foundation placed on the same D-Class. After another 15 minutes with no changes observed, the D-Class closed the experiment, remarking that it was stupid. The research team told the D-Class to remain composed and to just continue along with the trials unless they wanted to be reprimanded. After that was a Daboon Adult Onesie Pikachu Animal Pajamas. A few researchers held back laughter as the hardened, muscular D-Class in front of them stood around in a Pikachu onesie that barely fit him. After asking him how he was feeling, the subject quickly turned aggressive. The results from this test were deemed inconclusive, due to researchers being unable to determine if the quick snap in anger was as a result of a potential anomaly or whether the D-Class was just getting fed up with having to do this. In my opinion, this test was hilarious. For the next test, 2 D-Classes were brought in, clad in Pikachu onesies. The D-Class were placed 4 meters apart. After a period of time, a tingling sensation was reported in the arms and legs, akin to that pins and needles feeling you get when your arms fall asleep, or when you get shocked by static electricity. The next one had 4 D-Classes, all dressed similar to the previous group. Instead of being meters apart, they were asked to hold hands, which the D-Classes begrudgingly did. Severe migraines were reported, as well as throbbing pain in the cranium and lower jaws of the face. Near the tailbone, some D-Classes reported a dull aching. Most curiously, several areas on their body had begun to change in skin coloration, namely, a mustard yellow. Eventually, the Foundation began to test for an affiliation or emotional connection to the Pokemon franchise. Could that be the key to understanding SCP-5254? Another 4 D-Class, all noted Pokemon fans, were brought in. One had owned a copy of Pokemon Yellow for the Game Boy when he was a child, and another had a high-leveled account on the Pokemon Go app. The Foundation discovered that these D-Class reported muscle spasms along the extent of their spines, with one complaining of tightness in their chest before coughing up tufts of fur, and another physically recoiling upon an attempt at physical contact, in fear they would electrically shock the researcher. These experiments proved to be fruitful for the Foundation, as they learned that SCP-5254 was irreversible. Removing the clothing or items did not result in the transformative properties of SCP-5254 reversing. Furthermore, the testing went on beyond this point, just to cover all possible bases of what SCP-5254 was before the details were properly ironed out. A total of 56 D-Class personnel were lost during these experiments, and testing paused due to concern by Foundation higher-ups of a potential security breach and damage being done to the site's power grid. But most importantly, a connection to the Pokemon brand was what enabled SCP-5254 to truly take effect. That's what occurred at the Outbreak Festival, where the bodies of costume Pikachu fanatics fused into their costumes and barreled towards the crowd. Now that the Foundation understood the how of SCP-5254, they still had to get to the why. Even by Foundation standards, this is a pretty odd and random anomaly. Did the answers lie with Game Freak or the Pokemon Company itself? After the festival incident, the Foundation put web probes into the servers of the Pokemon Company's Japanese branch and had their web crawlers scan through millions of correspondence emails to find any hint of unusual behavior. A series of emails between major shareholders in the company were found. The first was from Kimishima Tatsumi, the CEO of Nintendo, the overseeing company above the Pokemon Company, and Tsunekazu Ishihara, the latter's CEO. Do not ask questions. If this Sir Viper wants manpower for his project, give it to him. Our society will not mess with these irrelevant individuals. He, whoever he claims to be, may be charging us a small fortune, but at least he seems genuinely interested in bringing our creations to life. Bringing their creations to life? How curious. The email was dated to 2017, 2 years before the outbreak incident. The Foundation decided to dig deeper. Another email from 2017 exchanged between the two individuals months after the first. Tuesday will mark the 5th visit by the Fukushima orphanage to our headquarters. I told the press it's part of our global outreach program to spread the joy of Pokemon to the rest of the world. Early results have been positive. I should have a specimen to show you the next time we meet in Tokyo. Your daughter likes Eevee, yes? It seemed like these executives were talking about creating real Pokemon somehow. What did the orphanage have to do with this? Another email read, "Play anytime, anywhere, with anyone." Yes, the slogan for the Switch is very apt for what we're trying to accomplish. Your marketing team deserves a raise. I am pleased to report Pokemon Go has hit 750 million unique downloads in July, and 5 million daily average users this past week. The popularity of the franchise continues to grow. Think of the possibilities once we integrate augmented reality (AR) technology into the project. Altaria as a clean and efficient form of air transportation. Charizard serving in the self-defense forces. And yes, Pikachu making our reliance on nuclear energy a thing of the past. Soon Pokemon will come to life before our very eyes. The Foundation couldn't believe something as absurd as creating real Pokemon was a genuine possibility for these companies. It was going on right beneath their noses. But the emails from 2018 began to show cracks in the Pokemon Company and Nintendo's plans. The accidents are growing in number. Are you sure Sir Viper has everything under control? We cannot hide these incidents from the public forever. We already have our hands full trying to catch the runaways. If we don't take action soon, more people will get hurt. Or worse, the Pokemon brand will be tarnished forever. Whoever was responsible for creating Pokemon for the companies was going by the alias of Sir Viper, and it seemed like their experiments weren't working the way they planned. An email directly addressed to Sir Viper fully encapsulated the Pokemon company's disgust at the individual once they realized the experiments weren't succeeding in creating an immersive, fun Pokemon experience in the real world. You promised us Pokemon as pets and companions, not these mutations. I've had to recall thousands of faulty merchandise, with tens of thousands of defective products still circulating the market. Just what kind of sorcery have you forced upon our hands? The government is breathing down my neck. Tatsumi-san has had to resign, and I'm starting to hear about this Foundation poking around. Tell me the truth. Is there any way to reverse the effects, or have you doomed us all? Sir Viper 1995, as their screen name read, responded with this. I don't know what to tell you. I've given the people what they want. Only true fans will get a Pokemon of their own. Your company was the very best at building your brand. Congratulations. Today Pokemon has taken over our hearts and minds. Perhaps one day, we will see them take over the world. And with that, the company had cut off all communication with Sir Viper. But now the Foundation had to get to the bottom of what was happening in these boardrooms and offices. Making Pokemon in real life? It sounded crazy, and from the way the emails were worded, they had apparently succeeded in making something even if they considered it a failure. 3 months later, after all of the research on SCP-5254 was conducted, the Overseer Council authorized a raid on the Pokemon Company offices in Minato City, Tokyo, on June 16, 2019. From the way the emails were written, they had reason to believe that civilians were potentially being held against their will and used in these experiments. Failure to deal with them now could potentially spell disaster if they got out, and the cause of SCP-5254 wasn't immediately neutralized. Following the Japanese government's authorization of the raid, a Foundation Mobile Task Force detachment from Epsilon 11 Nine-Tailed Fox was stationed outside the offices. The task force broke into the building through the fire exit and promptly cleared out tourists and civilians from the area. During the raid, they encountered a large creature that resembled a Charizard, an orange fire-breathing dragon Pokemon, that stopped them in their tracks in the hallway. Wings and elongated snout, the perfect color. It looked exactly as if a Charizard had left from the screen and into real life. It spewed combustible orange liquid at the team, but they quickly dispatched it with ease, using their weapons to put some water on the Pokemon's fire. Well, the water was actually a salvo of bullets, but the metaphor still works. Most of the building was cleared, and those inside detained for further questioning. But then the team came to a set of steel doors. Inside was a room littered with toys, brightly colored walls, and large metal cages. Inside the cages were some of the most disgusting creations the team had ever witnessed. Sir Viper's failed experiments, clearly. Entities at various stages of SCP-5254 transformation. One resembled a Vulpix, a fox Pokemon. It had engorged eye sockets and blood flowing down their cheeks. Another cage had a boy with cheekbones protruding high and sideways, pulling thin skin over the rest of his face. Another had a large bear-like entity with serrated claws, with alternate fingers peeling and decomposing underneath. Most horrifying of all were a pair inside cages near the other side of the room. A girl with an extended, flattened, engorged tongue, which pulled drool onto the floor at her feet. She was made to resemble a Lickitung, a Pokemon with a similarly large tongue. Another was an elongated purple snake, like the Pokemon Arbok, except its head was that of a toddler. It writhed back and forth, bawling and screaming. The team requested immediate medical pickup to remove the specimens from the room. Wherever Sir Viper, the individual responsible for this, was, the Foundation could not locate them. The Foundation contained the experiments and detained Mr. Ishihara, the CEO of the company. He was brought back to the research site for an interview. Ishihara claimed not to know of the experiment's existence, but he quickly broke down. When asked about Sir Viper, Ishihara had this to say: "We didn't ask too many questions. When we found out what he had been doing to the children, we terminated his contract immediately, but the damage had been done. Later, we discovered he had already tampered with our production lines and distribution infrastructure. At this point, it's impossible to tell which products had been affected on the market." Following this, global coordination between Nintendo, the Foundation, and the Pokemon Company in an attempt to figure out a solution to products that were affected by SCP-5254 is presently ongoing. All attempts to contact Sir Viper 1995's email result in the same automated message: "Happy hunting, but even you can't catch them all."
All hell had broken loose. Sophie could barely believe she had survived for this long. Getting used to one dramatic change in her life was hard enough, but almost immediately after, the entire world had seemed to go crazy. As a result, she now had a whole new existence to try and adapt to, scavenging for what little scraps of food she could find in the ruined, desolate city. The monsters could appear at any time, day or night, either one on their own or whole droves of the nightmarish creatures that had been let loose on the world. This life was somehow far more dangerous on a day-to-day basis than her old one had been. And given Sophie used to work for the SCP Foundation, that really was saying something. Formerly known as Dr. Cartwright, she had been a researcher at the Foundation for a number of years. While she had been far from reaching the upper echelons of the organization's most notorious staff, with the likes of Drs. Jack Bright and Kane Pathos Crow, nobody could deny Sophie was an expert when it came to studying the anomalous. As much as she understood the importance of their directive to safeguard humanity, the Foundation had, first and foremost, been a job to her, a means to an end, something to earn a living from and then move on. It wasn't worth giving up everything for, and when her life needed more focus than her work, Sophie wasn't hesitant to step away. Her mother had fallen ill, terminally, and as a result needed around-the-clock care. So Dr. Sophie Cartwright had no choice but to hand in her resignation from the SCP Foundation. There were times when she missed it, and moments after her mother eventually passed that Sophie considered going back. But she came to realize it wasn't the work itself she missed, not even her co-workers at the Foundation. It was the occasional rare anomaly that was just a completely harmless little oddity, not a monstrous abomination. Often in her new, unfamiliar life of resignation, Sophie would find herself looking wistfully at a picture of herself and one such anomaly. Technically, it was against the Foundation's rules to possess any photographic evidence of SCPs, but Sophie had made sure it didn't look like anything out of the ordinary. The picture had been taken on her phone and showed Sophie crouching down with a face of a curious but completely normal-looking black and gray tabby cat poking up in the foreground.
Nothing about the picture gave any indication that the cat, named Josie, was actually missing her hindquarters and back legs. SCP-529, as the Foundation had designated her, was one of the few completely harmless SCPs in their care. Her only anomalous trait being that her entire back half was missing, either because it didn't exist or had somehow been displaced in another dimension, hence her nickname, Josie the Half-Cat. Given that she had been allowed to roam freely around the Foundation facility she was kept in, Josie had run across Dr. Cartwright a number of times, the pair of them eventually becoming friends. With a sigh and smile, Sophie had been looking at the photo on the day everything went wrong. Steel-capped boots came rushing up the stairs and down the corridors to her apartment, worn by a group of black-clad mercenaries. You see, unbeknownst to Sophie at the time she had tendered her resignation from the SCP Foundation, a number of the organization's higher-ups had also done the same. While Sophie's reasons for leaving were purely personal, the wave of resignations from other high-ranking Foundation personnel came as a reaction to something called Project Pneuma. This was an operation that had uncovered a disturbing truth about the psychosphere, a shared human unconsciousness that had led to the O5 Council proposing a new directive for the organization. Those that objected left the Foundation. Others were killed by their former employer and its merciless hit squads in cold blood. Perhaps thanks to some administrative error filing Sophie's resignation alongside those that had left after learning about Pneuma, or maybe because the Foundation didn't want her extensive knowledge of the anomalous being used against their newfound directive, they had sent a mobile task force to her apartment. Filing down the corridor, the soldiers lifted a battering ram and swung it forward, shattering the door, wooden splinters littering the floor as they breached the entrance. But Sophie had heard them coming, escaping as fast as she could, descending a fire escape ladder until she reached the street below. At that moment in time, Sophie had no idea why the Foundation had sent a hit squad out to kill her. Of course, the answer to that question quickly became obvious. Shortly after, reports came pouring in from all over the world, broadcast over every news channel before they were ultimately blocked. The SCP Foundation had gone public, revealing its existence to the entire world and declaring its new mission statement. Rather than protecting the world from anomalies, the Foundation had declared war, calling for the total and utter extinction of humanity. While Sophie had no way of knowing the reasons for the Foundation going rogue, it was clear that working for them in the past had put a target on her back. Luckily, she managed to avoid the MTF coming after her, getting swept up in a crowd that was fleeing from something far more horrific. SCP-682 had been released and was devouring people in broad daylight. The waking nightmare didn't stop there. Over the next few months, the Foundation released a number of dangerous anomalies on the world, using them to slaughter innocent people in droves, assassinate world leaders, and cripple organizations like the Global Occult Coalition to hinder humanity's chances of fighting back. And amongst it all, living through the chaos and carnage were tiny pockets of survivors. Although those two were starting to be rapidly picked off by the Foundation, deploying more of their mobile task force operatives or compliant SCPs to eliminate the refugees. Sophie had witnessed firsthand the Foundation's attacks, and as a result, had found it best to keep moving from camp to camp, only staying with one group of fellow survivors for a few nights each before moving on. She wasn't sure if the Foundation was specifically attacking the refugee camp she stopped at, or if it was a continuous, systematic extermination effort. She'd been noting down her ponderings in a half-burned notebook she had found while scavenging abandoned grocery stores for any remaining food that was still edible. A cynical part of her thought that it was perhaps pointless to document what was happening, but the former researcher in Sophie wanted to preserve any information she could about what the Foundation was subjecting people to. If anything, that knowledge might prove useful to someone in the future. Although, what future was a question Sophie Cartwright kept returning to, with no optimistic answer in sight. It was easy to miss how things had once been, to yearn for life, to get back to the way it once was, even though it was impossible now that the anomalies were rampaging the world over. It made sleeping hard, the fear of waking up to see the face of SCP-682 or SCP-096 staring back at her the moment she opened her eyes. One night, it was worse than ever. Every sound, no matter how faint or far away in Sophie's mind, could have been made by a carnivorous creature or an approaching Foundation foot soldier. A bottle clinked, waking Sophie from her restless sleep. Something was nearby, and from the sound of it, it was getting closer and closer. Sitting up in the alleyway she'd been sleeping in, Sophie looked around her, feeling her heart thumping against her ribs in fear. Then, through the dark, she caught the sight of a pair of beady, reflective eyes, followed by the sounds of a drawn-out, defensive yowl. For a second, she wondered if it could be. No, surely not. The eyes approached, a small, shadowy form behind them. Sophie could barely make it out in the night's darkness, even with the glow of distant fires in the sky on the horizon. But from what she could see, the creature approaching her was small, just about smaller than an average cat, about half the size. Her fingers trembling, she reached out a hand towards it as gently as she could, allowing it to sniff her for a moment. Then she felt it duck under her open palm, letting her stroke up its arched back. When her hand reached about halfway, Sophie could feel the slight yield of a barely tangible back half, which could only mean one thing. "Josie?" Sophie asked, holding a sob at the back of her throat. The little half-cat replied with a meow, recognizing the voice of her human friend from the Foundation. Immediately she leaped into the former researcher's lap, allowing Dr. Cartwright to hold her and stroke her. Giving in, so glad to be reunited with Josie, Sophie started to let out stifled sobbing sounds, careful not to attract attention, but allowing herself to be the happiest she'd felt in months since this had all started. Although she had no way of understanding Josie's meows, Dr. Cartwright assumed that the brave little half-cat had managed to escape the Foundation facility she used to call home with relative ease. And she was right. Since Josie was allowed to roam freely, she had been able to make a break for it when the Foundation's MTF kill squads opened fire on their own personnel at their various sites across the globe. The loud noise had caused Josie the half-cat to flee and hide until the sounds of gunfire and screams had all died down. By the time she emerged from her hiding place, a number of the anomalies once kept in containment had now been set loose on the world. With the facility busted wide open, SCP-529 had taken it upon herself to leave, and had been surviving in much the same way Sophie had, scavenging for scraps, passing from one refugee camp to the next, usually greeted with curiosity by any ordinary civilian who had never seen a cat with its entire back half missing. Now that they had been tearfully reunited, Josie and Sophie stuck together on their continuing travels through the now treacherous and SCP-infested world. Sophie's entries in her makeshift journal started to take on much more positive tones. While it was hard to be entirely optimistic living through an anomalous apocalypse, her spirits were at least lifted by having her little half-cat companion alongside her. Josie never seemed to stray too far from Sophie's side as they hiked their way across the country. Occasionally, SCP-529 would climb up her human friend's back and rest on her shoulders as they traversed more open terrain, her missing back half making it look like the little half-cat was perched precariously on her front two legs, next to Sophie's head. And, of course, whenever they stopped for the night, Josie would sleep curled up and purring contentedly, right next to Sophie. When the next morning came, she would awaken, stretch out her front paws with a yawn, then nuzzle at Sophie's sleeping face to wake her up. At first, Dr. Cartwright's plan had been to head due west from where she had started, hoping to reach Yellowstone National Park and access SCP-2000. There was a Foundation facility there, hidden deep underground and filled with all manner of anomalous technology. It was all intended to be used in case the world ended, and the human race was wiped out, even capable of mass-producing new human beings with customized memories, as well as holding a backup of all cumulative knowledge and data on Earth. Every book ever written, every terabyte of information on the internet, everything. However, passing through another camp, Sophie and Josie received word from one of the other survivors. Apparently, the Foundation had predicted that somebody with knowledge of SCP-2000 might try something like that, and how it would undermine their plans to wipe out humanity. During one of the moments where rebelling groups were able to temporarily restore TV and internet service, it was reported that the Foundation had already put a stop to that potential option from reverting their apocalypse. They had intentionally triggered an eruption of the Yellowstone supervolcano, totally obliterating the facility housing SCP-2000 and one of humanity's last hopes at survival. "Well, thanks for telling me," Sophie sighed. By now, she had long given up almost all hope that things would ever be the same again. But hearing the news about Yellowstone had extinguished the last little ember of optimism that she had left. There was no way back. Sensing her friend was upset, Josie meowed at her, either as if to tell Sophie, "It's okay," or "I'm hungry." As the pair turned to leave, though, the other survivor called out at them. "Wait!" they said. "Look, I heard another rumor, and it might be a total myth, but there's meant to be a sanctuary not far from here." "What do you mean, sanctuary?" Sophie asked. "Like another camp? The Foundation will wipe it out within a week." "No, not a camp," the survivor replied. "It's just a rumor, but supposedly there's a refuge. Some place where the SCP Foundation can't get to. Apparently there's a shelter, as well as plenty of food and water, probably enough for you and the little one." Sophie looked out of the corner of her eye at Josie, balanced on her shoulder. The pair of them had gone weeks without eating before arriving at this camp, and she had no idea how long it would be before they reached the next. The sight of her half-cat companion motivated her. They needed to survive. As long as they did, the Foundation couldn't win. Giving the other survivor a nod, they pointed her in the right direction. "That way, a few miles at least, but you gotta be careful getting through the forest," they explained. "Be careful. The Foundation's got people out on patrols over there, and they're real weird too. I seen them doing this strange ritual, letting their commander stab them, testing whether they can still feel pain or not." Within a few hours, the sun had set, with both Sophie and Josie deep in the heart of the woods. Just like every night since the Foundation had initiated their war on humanity, every sound, every snapped twig or rustling leaves in the breeze, filled Sophie with dread. But this time, at least she knew with certainty that there were MTF troops nearby. She could see their flashlights, beams of light bleeding through between the trees. Carefully holding Josie in her arms, she stepped carefully and quietly as she could through the forest. The half-cat was trembling, clearly feeling just as fearful as Sophie was. The former researcher was praying that her little friend wouldn't make a sound. She knew she wouldn't be able to help it if she did. Cats did instinctively make defensive yowls if they felt threatened, but even the slightest noise from Josie would give away their position to the MTF sweeping the area. "Fan out!" she heard the task force's field commander call. "Even spread. If there's anyone here, you all know what to do." Sophie ducked down behind a fallen tree, covering her own mouth with her free hand, trying to stop her panicked breathing. Her only option were to make a break for it, dashing through the forest and hope she and Josie weren't caught, or worse, killed. Though these days there was really no difference between the two. Or she could wait for the MTF to pass by, continuing their search. She had spent months trying to survive in this anomalous apocalyptic nightmare. By now, the Foundation couldn't have known she was there. Their forces were just combing the forest looking for any survivors they could find. But if she stayed still, there was still a chance one of the MTF would find her and Josie, and would either alert the others or just open fire on the spot. All things considered, neither option sounded ideal. Josie was getting restless, trying to wriggle free of Sophie's grip. The half-cat's incorporeal back half meant Sophie could only hold what little underside the feline friend had. Slowly, she started to get up and made her way out from behind the tree, right into the path of an MTF trooper's flashlight. "Got a live one!" he yelled. A flash of light and a loud bang echoed through the forest. The bullet had torn through Sophie's chest, narrowly missing her half-cat, but the noise of the shot had been more than enough to startle her. As Sophie dropped to the forest floor, gripping her heavily bleeding wound and writhing in pain, Josie leaped into the air towards the Foundation operative. Either in shock or because she somehow understood her protector had been shot, the brave little cat started clawing at the soldier's face. Despite her sharp front claws tearing at him, leaving red lines over his face, the armed man didn't react. It was as if he couldn't feel pain at all. The MTF trooper gripped Josie by the neck fur, pulling her away from him. Before he could reach for his sidearm, someone charged at him, knocking the Foundation operator over. Another shot rang out as he fell, tackled by Sophie. Meanwhile, Josie had dropped to the ground, landing on her two visible feet and hissing at the soldier. Scrambling to her feet, Sophie picked up Josie and ran, the sounds of the rest of the task force receding into the distance behind her. The little half-cat was looking back over her human friend's shoulder, watching as the sweeping flashlights of the MTF kill squad fanned between the trees until they eventually disappeared from view. Her earlier adrenaline spike began to drop sharply in time with the gradual rise of the sun. Sophie had long since slowed down, certain that she'd be able to give the Foundation's foot soldiers the slip. Josie had taken her favorite perch on Sophie's shoulder again, meaning she could use her hands to apply pressure to her 2 wounds. But with every step, the former researcher could feel her limbs getting heavier. Her pulse, which had drummed faster than ever as her and her half-cat had fled, was now slowing down with every fading beat. She was tired, so much that she could barely keep her head up, until eventually, Sophie had to stop. She sat at the edge of a lake in the middle of the forest, exhaustedly trying to catch her breath. Calmly, Josie hopped off her shoulder and sat down at her side, licking her paw and cleaning behind her ears. Sophie looked at her little friend and smiled, feeling a tear run down her face. She reached into her bag and produced her journal, tearing out a page and scrawling down a note with the last of her strength. To whoever finds this half-cat, her name is Josie. She's my only friend left in the whole world. I've taken care of her for as long as I can, but I'll be dead soon. Please take care of her for me. Take her to safety. Be good to her, and she'll be good to you. And if you scavenge any cheese, only give her a little as a treat. After tying the note to Josie's midsection, so it rested atop her semi-corporeal back half, Sophie looked around one last time. The lake was calm, a tiny pocket of remaining peace in a world gone mad, overrun with anomalies. Guess we did make it to a sanctuary after all, Josie, she whispered weakly. Giving her little half-cat one last scratch behind the ears, Josie meowed gratefully. Finally, unable to keep her eyes open and her head up any longer, Sophie Cartwright let herself drift off. Josie was left meowing at her friend to wake up. She sat with her all day. She didn't move, didn't even wake up when Josie nuzzled her face against hers like she had before. Sophie's face felt much colder now against the confused half-cat's fur. Eventually, Josie wandered off into the forest, towards an uncertain future. Maybe if this future wasn't set in stone, if it could be reset, then Josie the half-cat would see her friend Sophie again. Now go and check out SCP-5000, the full story compilation, if you want to know more about the events that led up to now. Or take a little trip back in time and spend a day with Josie the half-cat in Is SCP-999 no longer the cutest SCP? SCP-529 Josie the half-cat.